Chapter 1568. When Mikura woke up, he realized that he was in the infirmary. He took out his phone and looked at his face in the reflection on the screen. His face, which should have been swollen from being slapped, had completely recovered. There was no pain, no internal injuries, as if he hadn't participated in the competition at all. He already couldn't remember how he had collapsed. It was just at the moment his eyes met Wang Ling's, a huge emptiness and loneliness assaulted his mind, causing his thoughts to stagnate. Then, Mikura closed his eyes. This duel was like a dream. "Student, you're awake?" The old auntie in the infirmary looked at Mikura. "Doctor, my injuries, you fainted during the competition, and you were sent here without any external injuries. But we can't determine your internal injuries for the time being. How are you feeling? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" "No," Mikura was astonished. He was already uninjured when he was sent here. Logically speaking, given how hard Wang Ling had hit him, it was impossible for him to recover so quickly. So, did Ho-Lang-san do something? Mikura was puzzled. "Student, if you're not feeling unwell, please give up your bed. There are still students waiting in line for treatment." "How far has the competition progressed?" Mikura was even more puzzled. "There are currently 125 people, and 25 people will be selected for the Arena Master Battle." "The Arena Master Battle has already begun?" "That's right. It said that the winner will be decided through a contest of mental strength. The student who fought with you earlier is one of the 25 Arena Masters," the doctor said. Mikura understood. He had heard of this Arena Master Battle before. The 25 Arena Masters were the defenders. As long as they could defend against 5 random people's mental attacks, they would directly advance to the next round. As for the attackers, as long as they succeeded in their attack, they would become the new Arena Master. After becoming the new Arena Master, they would have to continue defending against 4 people's attacks to advance to the next round. According to the rules of this closed-door competition, only 50 people could advance to the next round. That was to say, the first 50 people to advance would advance to the next round. "How is Ho-Lang-san? Closed-door competition, how would I know?" The doctor sighed. As he spoke, he pointed to the door with his eyes. Wei Akira was taken aback for a moment before he got off the bed and walked towards the infirmary. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he was shocked by the scene in front of him, because it was in the corridor in front of the infirmary. Those who had fainted were lying on the ground like sardines. "What is this?" Like a piece of wood, Mikura Wei Ming was rooted to the spot by the scene in front of him. About 90% of the people lying on the ground had been sent by Wang Ling. Because of everyone who faced Wang Ling. Finally, they all closed their eyes. He successfully advanced to the first 10% of the group stage. Wang Ling's fluctuating heart was finally mostly at ease. He didn't expect that the winner of the Arena Lord round would be decided by a battle of mentality. Conversely, this was what he was better at. Compared with physical contact, mental damage was actually less harmful. Coupled with the restriction of the one-time use talisman on him, he could almost ignore the damage caused by the mental battle. For example, in the Arena Lord round, Wang Ling only needed to sit upright and calculate functions in his mind. Whoever dared to invade his mental space would immediately be entangled by countless parabolas, and die on the spot, according to the memories of the people who had woken up after the fight with Wang Ling. Because the calculations in their brains had been too complicated, they already couldn't remember exactly what had happened. They just felt like their minds had been enveloped by a sea of parabolas and mathematical symbols. After waking up, they actually didn't feel the slightest bit distressed about their failure. Instead, they felt very guilty for not learning math well. As a result, some rumors began to spread in the stadium. Ho-Lang-san, a magical man. He's actually calculating math problems during the entire competition. Ho-Lang-san is really a very gentle man. I heard that when student Wei Akira was injured, it was also Ho-Lang-san who healed him. He actually healed his opponent. No wonder so many people joined the Grey Sect. I get it. He's a magical man. So are the 9 Paths and Grey Sect branches still recruiting? I'm pretty good at Chinese and math. Wang Ling, in the infinite Milky Way, the monk had originally been playing Gamoku with Dusk. Before the first game was over, the monk had already turned to his you character and projected an image of Wang Ling's match on Earth into the air. Savage couldn't wait for the monk to leave after this game. But when he saw that the image in the air was of Wang Ling's match, he deliberately slowed down a lot. He pretended to be thinking seriously about the game and looked like he didn't care at all, but in fact, he was quietly watching Wang Ling's every move out of the corner of his eye. "TSK, you really aren't frank." The monk couldn't help laughing. "If you want to watch, just watch openly. This poor monk has plenty of time." Savage frowned. "Monk, you should know who he is, right? Don't talk nonsense. This poor monk doesn't know." Monk Jin Dang fiddled with the Buddha beads in his hand, his eyes narrowed into slits, his expression extremely mysterious. "You already have the answer in your heart, don't you?" Dusk was silent for a while, but only said 3 words, "Mysterious thing." The monk laughed. "Whimsical idea." Savage let out a long sigh. "But apart from this, I really can't think of where this power came from. Tianming is still locked up there, so it can't be him." Monk Jin Dang shook his head and said, "I once thought of many possibilities, but in the end, I rejected them all. Do you see this poor monk's pair of you characters? Back then, in order to test his identity, I only got a glimpse of his silhouette, but this poor monk's you character was already blind. There's actually such a thing." When Dusk and Peng Shiren next to him heard this, they were utterly stunned. They had never heard the monk mention this before. "That's too much, monk." Although Dusk had just suffered a setback at Wang Ling's hands, he still didn't believe that Wang Ling could be that powerful. He felt that the monk's remarks were a little exaggerated. "If you don't believe me, you can try." The monk smiled. "Now, you can enter Ling Jinren's head and take a look. Try invading it with your mental energy and you'll know." "What are you plotting?" Dusk's expression was a little alert. "I'm just responding to your doubts. Isn't the truth the more practical? If you're afraid, this poor monk will understand. After all, this poor monk is also afraid." The monk smiled. "Heh, it's just a try. I'll give it a try." Dusk snorted. A few seconds later, Dusk closed his eyes and stopped thinking for a while. Chapter 1569. The monk hadn't expected Dusk to fall to the ground at all. To compete with Ling Jinren in terms of functions, and to go so deep, if you didn't close your eyes, who would? Having experienced it firsthand, the monk was well aware of how terrifying this ability was. This time, Dusk had miscalculated. Monk Golden Lamp counted the time on his fingers. It would probably be a long time before Dusk woke up. However, the other party was too hostile to him, and kept trying to drive him away. After thinking it over, the monk felt that having Dusk close his eyes for the time being was the safest option. There were still many things in the universe that Dusk had to deal with, and now wasn't the time for him to throw away his life in vain. "Monk, you're deliberately letting him." Peng Shiren wasn't stupid, and could more or less see through the monk's intentions. But he still couldn't figure out why the monk was doing this. "You've caused trouble," the monk said as he looked at him. "Caused trouble?" Hearing this, Peng Shiren couldn't help looking puzzled. Then, he laughed bitterly, and there was vigilance in his eyes. "I'm just a soul now. What else do you want, monk?" Monk Golden Lamp only felt sorry for Peng Shiren's obstinacy. But he always believed that Tao ancestor Wang must have had an ulterior motive for choosing Peng Shiren as a true disciple back then. No matter what happened next, it was still necessary for Peng Shiren to exist. This was the best-case scenario that the monk had calculated so far. "You still don't understand the seriousness of the problem." The monk stared at Peng Shiren and said, "You also underestimate how terrifying that evil god is. Tao ancestor went through so much trouble to seal him back then, and it was reasonable. If you let him out, the universe will definitely be thrown into chaos. As long as the heavenly tomb is in my hands, what can he do? He's just a shark with its teeth pulled out." Peng Shiren finished speaking. The monk just looked at him quietly without saying a word. After a moment of silence, Peng Shiren's expression suddenly changed drastically, and he slumped to the ground. "It seems you've finally figured it out," the monk said. Peng Shiren looked flustered, and his cheeks started to drip with sweat. He had figured it out. His physical body, it was still in the star-devouring space. Although he had been hiding the location of the heavenly tomb, if the heretic god used his body, even if he didn't say anything, he could still find the heavenly tomb. Although that person's strength was not as great as before, he still had that kind of ability. Peng Shiren was very clear about this. However, Peng Shiren still couldn't believe that he had been deceived by the grave goddess. "I have a soul contract with him. It's impossible for him to betray me," Peng Shiren exclaimed. Tyrant put his palms together and sighed. "Do you know why Dao Ancestor couldn't kill him completely and chose to separate him into two and seal him separately?" Peng Shiren was stunned. Because this was something he had never thought about. With his master's personality, if he had a way to completely destroy such an evil god, he would definitely not use a roundabout method like sealing him. The evil beings in this world could only be completely eliminated in order to avoid future troubles. But Monk Golden Lamp knew the truth. However, there was no point in talking about these things now. The location of the heavenly tomb had been found by the grave god, which meant that the grave god was about to fuse with the other half of the heavenly tomb. "It's time for this poor monk to set off." At that moment, the monk said. "Monk. I'll go with you." Peng Shiren also stood up. "Stay in this astrolabe and wait for Denglong to wake up. With your current strength, you'll just die in vain if you go. You might even become the grave god's food," the monk said. "But can you win if you go?" Peng Shiren frowned. This poor monk can still delay it for a while. Monk Golden Lamp's expression looked fearless. He condensed an extremely thin thread from his spiritual power and penetrated Peng Shiren's soul, binding him firmly and chaining him together. Although the astrolabe also had restrictions set up by Denglong that could completely prevent Peng Shiren from escaping, Monk Golden Lamp still felt that it was safer this way. However, Jean Deng still felt that this double insurance would be safer. "Monk. What are you doing?" Peng Shiren tried to struggle. However, the monk had already made up his mind. His attitude was so firm that Peng Shiren couldn't imagine it. "Say no more. If you dare to say another word, this poor monk will tie you up with the turtle shell bind." As expected, Peng Shiren obediently shut up. The monk predicted that with Peng Shiren's personality, he would definitely not be able to accept such a shameful position. After doing all this, Monk Golden Lamp felt that it was about time. He used distance shrinking to inches to leave this vast astrolabe where Denglong lived. Buddha said, "If I don't go to hell, who will?" The Golden Lamp monk knew very well that his battle with the grave divinity wouldn't last long. This battle was destined to be one where he would jump back and forth on the edge of hell. But in fact, the monk didn't think he needed to hold on for too long. He just had to wait until Ling Zhenren's match was over. Who cared if he went to hell or not? That grave god would definitely die. In Jiudaohe's exclusive waiting room for contestants, Wang Ling returned victorious. Next to him was a stack full of baby magazines. A prize of 1 million Sun Island dollars was a lot of money for Wang Ling. Participating in a competition was originally forbidden in the old Wang family, especially when it came with a prize. But it was a closed-door meeting this time, so it wasn't a big problem. Of course, the most important thing was that Wang Ling had used his own ability to win the competition. Thus, with Wang Ming's help, he had worked very hard to compress his battle strength to the same level as his peers. At least in terms of aura. It was the same, but to be honest, despite all the preparations he had made, Wang Ling actually didn't feel like he was participating. Because most of the people present were Grey Church disciples. As soon as they saw that he was their opponent, they would think of ways to torture themselves, and at the slightest disagreement, they would start thinking about fixing the match. And just like that, Wang Ling had directly entered the final hurdle. As for the battle of defending the arena, which was a competition of spirit, Wang Ling didn't think he had used his own ability. That person had fainted at the sight of the function in his head. Could he be blamed? It could only be said that it was a result of his lack of skill. Although Wang Ling now also felt that he had gone a little overboard. The competition clearly hadn't ended yet. But he was already thinking about how to spend the 1 million Sun Island dollars to buy An a present. But for Wang Ling, this money was indeed like he had picked it up for free. There was no longer much suspense. Before Mother Wang had become pregnant with Wang Ling had actually been a little resistant in his heart. He didn't know whether Wang's birth would be another kind of disaster for the earth and the universe, but as the day of hatching approached, regarding the new member of the old Wang family, Wang Ling suddenly felt a different kind of emotion in his heart. Until the moment when he had come to Sun Island and decided to participate in the competition to buy Wang a present, Wang Ling finally had a deeper realization. His attitude toward his upcoming little sister. He couldn't say what it was. But the joy he felt was the same as when he had seen the limited edition crispy noodle snacks. But now, for Wang Ling, there was a new problem. Now that he had 1 million Sun Island dollars, what should he buy for his sister? He didn't know what this little girl, did she like crispy noodle snacks? If she didn't, should he groom her? Chapter 1570. When Dusk woke up, he found that he and Peng Shiren were entangled by a powerful spirit thread. Brother Zhang. You're finally awake. Peng Shiren cried out with a frightened expression on his face. He felt his sea of consciousness explode, as if something was burning in his lungs, and a huge vortex had appeared in the center of his sea of consciousness. It was completely sunken in, and there wasn't even a drop of seawater inside. Dusk sensed that something was wrong, and was stunned to find that his memories had actually been tampered with. He placed his claw gently on Peng Shiren's head next to him, and found the same problem. A small part of their memories had actually been quietly tampered with in the astrolabe. It was already very clear who the instigator of this matter was. Did the monk do this? Dusk frowned deeply, and his emotions became complicated. Before the game of Gamoku was over, the monk had already disappeared. The direction of the incident was very clear. Dusk picked up a chess piece and broke it open, and a trace of Buddha fire of the past flowed out of it. Looking at this scene, Dusk instantly knew how Monk Golden Lamp had done all this. A chess piece of the past, it turned out that the monk had already started to set this up as early as the game. Dusk frowned deeply. He didn't understand why the monk had done this. Back then, Dao ancestor Wang had chosen Peng Shiren as his true disciple. Logically speaking, the monk shouldn't have had a good impression of Peng Shiren. But now, he had set up this trap, and used the Buddha fire of the past hidden in the chess piece to conceal the fact that Peng Shiren had discovered the heavenly tomb during the game. Now, Dusk completely understood. The monk had done all this on purpose. He had deliberately let Peng Shiren spy on his mind, and then faint from the mental backlash. He had also deliberately played a game of chess with Dusk, so that both Dusk and Peng Shiren would fall for it. Monk, you think I didn't notice? You underestimate me too much. Dusk smiled bitterly. He closed his eyes and pinched his fingers together to calculate, and the expression on his face turned complicated. He couldn't help glaring at Peng Shiren. Why didn't you wake me up earlier? Peng Shiren hung his head, looking very much like a child who had made a mistake. Peng Shiren roughly understood the current situation. The monk used the Buddha fire of the past to temporarily conceal the fact that the heavenly tomb had already been opened. After the monk left, Peng Shiren repeatedly pondered the words the monk said to him before he left. His body and soul began to fear the god of the grave. Forget it. I can't blame you. Who would have thought that a monk would be so scheming? Bai stared at Peng Shiren and sighed. This monk is trying to get rid of us and fight the grave god himself. This was suicide. I have to help him. Just as he was about to get up, Peng Shiren suddenly screamed, "Don't move, Brother Zhang." There was a look of agony on his face. Peng Shiren felt a special pain because the spirit threads that were entwined around their bodies were pulled. This monk, how dare he, only now did Bai sense the abnormality of the spirit thread. This was not an ordinary spirit thread, but a Buddha's salvation thread that could trace back to the soul. If the spirit thread was pulled or pulled away, Peng Shiren's soul would immediately be sent to reincarnation. Protecting Peng Shiren was the mission that Tao ancestor Wang gave him. The monk knew that Peng Shiren would not take the risk to pull the thread, so he disregarded Peng Shiren and forcefully left the astrolabe to fight for him. What is this monk trying to do? Bai was furious and flipped the chessboard. The Buddha's salvation thread could not be forcefully removed. Now, he could only wait for the Buddha's salvation thread to disappear automatically. There were two conditions for it to disappear automatically. First, the monk's spiritual power had already been exhausted, and he could not maintain the Buddha's salvation thread's power. Second, the monk had already died in battle. This was the worst situation. Previously, Bai wanted to chase the monk away because he wanted to find an opportunity to reach the heavenly tomb. He even thought of how to keep the monk in his astrolabe. He did not expect the monk to make a move before him. Brother Zheng, what should we do now? Peng Shiren knew that a disaster was imminent, and he did not know what to do. Bai sat cross-legged and lowered his head in deep thought. What to do? He did not know what to do either. The only thing he could do now was to sit cross-legged and chant Amitabha. On the other side, the monk was also searching for the heavenly tomb after trapping Bai and Peng Shiren in the astrolabe. He extracted Peng Shiren's concealed memory and fused it into his sea of consciousness. Then, he found the location of the heavenly tomb. There was a smell of gunpowder in this cosmic space that wasn't tainted by the slightest bit of stars. The monk could indeed feel that there was an intense battle here. Is it a hidden entrance? The monk frowned slightly. The monk did not expect that Tao ancestor Wang would hide the heavenly tomb here. If he did not extract Peng Shiren's memory, he would never be able to find the exact location of the heavenly tomb in the vast Milky Way. The monk opened the swastika talisman and used the power of the past Buddha's fire to enhance his vision to observe what had happened before he arrived here. In the end, he saw the old woman whose soul was ignited and who died in pain while screaming, "Run, run quickly!" The old woman screamed at the top of her lungs. As her soul burned, she finally turned into nothingness. The monk put his palms together and chanted the rebirth mantra in his heart to perform the ritual for the poor heavenly tomb keeper. The grave god was just as cruel as he had imagined. He knew that the old woman's soul had been burned and could not enter the reincarnation ritual. His current ritual might not be of any use. However, the monk still wanted to do it. Monks were compassionate and sought psychological comfort. "Monk, are you the only one here?" A few seconds later, a familiar figure appeared in front of the monk. It was the grave god's voice, but the body was not his original body. "You stole Shiren's physical body?" The monk looked at the person in front of him and was slightly stunned. The person in front of him had the handsome face of Peng Shiren, but the color of his eyes and hair had changed. Purple eyes, purple hair. Everything was a color that was filled with evil. There was also a small horn on his forehead. If I didn't want to break the soul contract with him, I wouldn't have to do this. However, fusing with his body gave me an unexpected benefit. I can do whatever I want in the heavenly tomb. The Tao ancestor can't bear to hurt his precious disciple. The grave god sneered. He released his aura slightly, and the monk immediately felt a strong wind in front of him. The kasaya on his body fluttered wildly in the wind, and a huge oppressive force brought with it a feeling of crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. "He's so strong." The monk was shocked. He felt like he was a tree branch swaying in the wind. The grave god at his peak was too terrifying. Evil purple light surged around his body, and his aura kept rising. He was like the king of the universe looking down on the mortal world. Chaotic energy rushed into the sky and engulfed half of the infinite Milky Way. This kind of power was beyond the monk's imagination. "Monk, are you here to transcend yourself?" Before the monk could react, the grave god moved and appeared behind Golden Lamp in an instant. He opened his hand and grabbed Golden Lamp's bald head. "Amitabha." The monk closed his eyes as the grave god grabbed his smooth head. There was no sadness or joy on his face. "You're not dodging. Are you trying to prove that you're stubborn?" The grave god snorted. Then, with a huge boom, his palm exploded, and the shockwave of the explosion spread endlessly. Black spatial cracks formed under the impact of the chaotic energy. The distance between them was measured in light years, and it continued to expand beyond the infinite Milky Way. No one would have thought that this terrifying scene, which was like the beginning of the universe, was created just to crush a monk's head. Chapter 1571. The monk's head contained the power of the heavenly tribulation. The moment the grave god crushed his head, the brain inside boiled and was released along with the power of the heavenly tribulation that had been suppressed for a long time. The monk had deliberately let the grave god crush his head, hoping to kill the grave god by self-detonating, but this idea was too naive. Even after such a big explosion, the grave god still stood tall in the universe. His body was wrapped in an ancient and mysterious mark. It was taken from the heavenly tomb. After taking over Peng Shiren's body, he had obtained benefits that the world couldn't understand. Among them was the ancient Taoist seal on his body. The grave god remembered that it was an ability that Tao ancestor Wang had displayed when he fought against him. At first, he thought it was a spell, but in fact, the ancient Taoist seal was also a chaotic object. They had spiritual intelligence. Once the grave god obtained the inheritance rights, they would wrap around his body like reptiles, making the grave god look majestic. Standing face to face with the grave god, Monk Jin Deng could even feel that he wasn't fighting a living being, but half of the universe. "Monk, you're not dead yet. Come. Fight again. I've obtained countless divine items from the heavenly tomb, and I can show them to you one by one." The grave god laughed arrogantly. He didn't take the monk seriously at all. In his eyes, Monk Jin Deng was just a tool to test the new Dharma treasure in his hand. As soon as he finished speaking, a ball of Buddha fire appeared about 100 feet in front of the grave god and gradually condensed into the monk's figure. Your aura has increased." The grave god had a playful look on his face when he saw the monk who had just appeared. After being tempered by the Buddha fire, the monk was reborn from the fire. The kasaya on his upper body was peeled off and turned into flower-like fragments that lingered around him. At this moment, his upper body was emitting a golden Buddha light, and a powerful aura of Buddhism accompanied the 3 balls of Buddha fire of the past, present, and future, opposing the grave god. Golden Body Mode. This was an ability that the monk had never used before. Because this was a technique that burned one's reincarnation realm cultivation as the price, it couldn't be used easily. The aura of an earth ancestor. No, not yet. Just a little bit more. The grave god sensed the power that Monk Jin Deng exuded. As he spoke, a jade Buddha head appeared in his palm. This was another divine item that the grave god had discovered in the heavenly tomb. "Monk, you are a paragon of Buddhism. Do you know what this is?" The grave goddess sneered. The monk's golden eyes moved slightly. Following that, a powerful energy burst out from his body. The immovable golden body actually cracked at the sight of the jade Buddha head. "Monk, you're still too young." He was sure that the monk would react when he presented the jade Buddha head, but he didn't expect that the monk would break his golden immovable body for such a Buddha head. Even the most holy of Buddhism was nothing more than this. As a matter of fact, this jade Buddha head belonged to none other than the Golden Lamp monk's teacher, who had passed away in meditation. This person was also a friend of Tao ancestor Wang. After the monk died, Tao ancestor Wang refined the monk's skull into this jade Buddha head and buried it together in this heavenly tomb. The grave divinity was knowledgeable. After identifying the origin of this jade Buddha head, he concluded that it was Monk Jin Deng's life gate. He never thought that the effect would be surprisingly good when he presented it at this moment. The next moment, there was a tremendous explosion in the universe. Monk Jin Deng forced his cracked immovable golden body to release endless Buddhist light, and for a moment, the endless sound of the great Tao resounded throughout the universe. The sound wave spread out, reaching countless light years away. Even the grave god was excited. He had been suppressed by Tao ancestor Wang for too long, and hadn't experienced a hearty battle for too long. He didn't care about the monk in front of him at all. But he also enjoyed the monk's torment, the pained expression on his face, the way he struggled and then roared, just like the tomb keeper of the heavenly tomb. In the end, everything was just dust in the universe. At the same time, thunder rained down on Earth in Shanghai City at that moment. Large swathes of dark clouds covered the sky, as if they were going to collapse. Father Wang could already see countless lightning bolts striking the ground through the window near the Wang family's small villa in particular, creating craters in the ground. A lot of big trees in the distance were directly split in half. Loopy Toad had been resting in the courtyard, but when it saw this scene, it shrank its neck and slipped into the villa. This lightning was too unusual. Loopy Toad instinctively sensed that this seemed to be a butterfly effect caused by something unusual in the universe. This wasn't natural lightning, nor was it heavenly punishment lightning. Although it was very faint, Loopy Toad could clearly sense that there seemed to be an almost imperceptible aura of primal chaos in this lightning. This was because when it had been promoted to a divine beast, it had personally experienced the pain of being surrounded by lightning mixed with the power of primal chaos. If it hadn't been for Lotus Sun at that time, it would have died. Fortunately, the Wang family's small villa had been enlightened by Wang Ling. There were also countless other enlightened gremlins inside, so the primal chaos lightning wouldn't affect it for the time being. But Loopy Toad still had a vague sense of foreboding. Child's father, Mother Wang, had been preparing dinner, but at that moment, she suddenly lost her balance and almost fell over. Loopy Toad hurriedly darted over and transformed into its human form to support her. In the end, Loopy Toad felt that Mother Wang had almost crushed it to death. Because Mother Wang was astonishingly heavy, it was far more than Loopy Toad had imagined. Could it be the weight of little girl Nwan in her belly? "Mother, how is it?" When Father Wang heard the news and rushed over, he sucked in a cold breath when he saw Loopy Toad under Mother Wang. The main thing was that this was Father Wang's first time seeing Loopy Toad in human form, and most importantly, it wasn't wearing anything. Lying under Mother Wang's body like that was indeed a little vulgar, but he didn't blame Loopy Toad, and instead felt a little grateful to this family dog. Luckily, Loopy Toad had been there just now. Father Wang went over and propped Mother Wang up. Loopy Toad heaved a huge sigh of relief when he saw Mother Wang's strong arms. "How can you be so relaxed?" Loopy Toad changed back into its dog form, its face full of shock. "Before Ling Ling left the country, he specially enlightened my arms. Now I also have a Qilin arm," Father Wang said with a smile. "Loopy Toad," Father Wang checked Mother Wang's condition. Then, he frowned. "She can't, her water broke. Nwan is going to give birth." "She's going to give birth?" Loopy Toad was shocked. Although it was almost 10 days ahead of the predicted time of childbirth, this little girl was in a hurry to break out of her shell, so there was nothing they could do about it. They had previous experience dealing with Wang Ling's birth. This time, Father Wang's preparations could be said to be exceptionally thorough. Old Wang family. Level 1 red alert. All gremlins, act according to plan. Father Wang hugged Mother Wang tightly and started to assign tasks to everyone in the Wang family's small villa. Also, quickly ask Lord Ma to invite Immortal Toya here. As soon as he said that, the fridge in the kitchen shook slightly. Cold air was released from it, and the fridge door slowly opened in front of everyone. Loopy Toad was alarmed. This was because, after being enchanted, there was actually an operating theater hidden inside the refrigerator. Sterile operating room, ready. The enlightened fridge gave off an emotionless electronic voice. She was really going to give birth. At that moment, Loopy Toad's heart was in turmoil. It also thought of something that might happen. It knew that the monk was now fighting with that grave god. And little girl Nwan had actually chosen to break out of her shell at this time. Loopy Toad felt that this wasn't a coincidence. Could it be that this girl was thinking of killing the grave god? Loopy Toad was horrified. F***K. No way. No way, she had just been born. Chapter 1572. Loopy Toad was greatly shocked to be born a full 10 days ahead of its due date. Loopy Toad had already seen how strong this little girl Nwan was when she was still an embryo in her mother's womb. He was able to hang Dao ancestor Wang's subordinate groundhog up and beat it up. If he was officially born, his strength would naturally be heaven-defying. But the grave goddess, was no ordinary person. Could he really beat him? In the body of an infant? Are you sure you don't need a few more years to develop? Loopy Toad pondered. It gazed at the scene of lightning bolts dancing like silver snakes outside the window, and suddenly had a deeper understanding of the birth of this strange phenomenon. Now, this was a lightning anomaly on Earth. Obviously, it was all caused by On One alone. Dark clouds loomed overhead and thunder boomed. It was as if doomsday had arrived. A lot of cultivators on Earth raised their heads one after another and maintained the same posture as Loopy Toad, looking up at the sky at a 45-degree angle. But the difference was, apart from Loopy Toad, the other cultivators on Earth didn't know what was behind this lightning anomaly. Many people thought that a mighty figure was transcending the tribulation. In reality, a devil's child was about to descend into the world. In the Wang family's small villa, the group of spiritual monsters had gone through countless drills to maintain an orderly order. In the end, Mother Wang was sent to a sterile operating room that had been prepared in advance in a semi-conscious state. Immortal Toya also arrived very quickly. Lord Ma sent him along with his two disciples, Jinshi and Enrich. The immortals are finally here. Invite him in. Father Wang was anxiously pacing back and forth in front of the fridge. When he saw Immortal Toya appear with Jinshi and Enrich, he hurried forward to greet them. Immortal Toya was flattered and hurriedly bowed. Senior Wang, there's no need to stand on ceremony, this is what this junior should do. Before Ling Jinren left the country, he already told us about this. Everyone in Battle's sect has been preparing for many days just for the moment when Wan Jinren is born, to ensure that nothing goes wrong. In addition, His Excellency the head of state also seems to be paying special attention to this matter on Huaxiao Alliance's side. He also talked to me on the phone a long time ago. Then what did the head of state say? My lord told Senior Wang to be at ease and to leave the rest to us. Also, after spiritual master Nuan was successfully born, he would hurry up and write his story. Don't learn from this shameless Kushwan, said Immortal Toya. These were the exact words of the princeps, and he imitated them word for word. Father Wang never thought that his family's little girl would actually be able to mobilize all the members of Battle's sect. He didn't know what to say. In his shock, he could only clasp his fists and bow. Then. I'll have to trouble you. No problem. Immortal Toya gave a gentle smile. Then, he fiddled with the medicinal gourd on his back, and a spiritual mist sprayed out from the mouth of the gourd, lingering around his, Jinshi and Enrich's bodies. This was the Miracle Hand's spirit mist, which had the effect of sterilizing and disinfecting when wrapped around the body. It can be used as a portable surgical gown. At that moment, standing in front of the fridge, Immortal Toya took a deep breath. The expression on his face was solemn, but there was also some glory and pride. This was a highly anticipated delivery ceremony, and he was expected to complete the mission of delivering Wanjinren. For this, Immortal Toya felt extremely honored. Jinshi, Enrich, are you ready? Immortal Toya asked. Everything is ready according to Shifu's instructions. My little sister and I rehearsed several times before. Jinshi smiled with dimples on his face. Rehearsed? Enrich simulated giving birth, and then cough. Let's not talk about this, the operation is more important. Yes, Shifu. Father Wang somehow felt that he had learned something incredible. At the same time, somewhere else in space. With another rumble and explosion, the dazzling light of chaos seemed to pierce through the barriers of the universe as it seeped into the infinite space of the Milky Way. The monk and the grave god exchanged blows again. The monk's right arm was broken, his motionless golden body was bathed in blood, and his originally handsome face was a little swollen. The grave god was happy and at ease, as if he was teasing a bird. He held the jade Buddha head in one hand and supported himself with the other. Boring, monk. You don't even deserve to be my toy. The grave god smiled contemptuously. If you want this thing, take it. Then, he loosened his hand and abruptly raised his leg to kick the jade Buddha head at the monk as if it were a soccer ball. It looked like an ordinary blow, but it contained vast divine might and terrifying divine power. Like a meteor from outer space, it illuminated the universe. With a bang, the monk was sent flying. The jade Buddha head had hit him in the chest, and he coughed up a lot of blood as his golden body cracked inch by inch. The grave god had never expected the monk to be so vulnerable. After a few rounds, he had lost interest in the monk. He had borrowed Peng Shiren's body to inherit the right to use the heavenly tomb, which had given him endless benefits and greatly increased his strength. The grave god thought that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call himself the overlord of the infinite Milky Way. He urgently needed to find a real expert to prove his strength. In a split second, the grave god's perception expanded infinitely from the infinite Milky Way to the Milky Way outside, analyzing every inch of space and every nebula in the universe. Finally, the grave god opened his eyes. Because at that moment, he suddenly sensed a very strong fluctuation of spirit power from Earth. Furthermore, the aura of this fluctuation definitely didn't belong to the teenager called Wang Ling. There are other experts on Earth? The grave god was instantly excited. On the other side, the blood-soaked monk had already deduced what was going on Earth. To be honest, the monk hadn't been able to predict this. He had thought that he had everything under control, and hadn't expected Wang Yuan to be born early. What was even worse was that the grave god had actually sensed this aura. How old was this spiritual master Yuan? Even if she was Ling Zhenren's little sister, she was just a newborn baby. How strong could she be? The monk gritted his teeth and endured the pain all over his body as he tried to delay the grave god again. However, the grave god had already lost interest in the monk. He raised his hand and directly sent the monk flying as if he were a fly. "Don't disturb me." Then, he moved to the vicinity of Earth in the blink of an eye, and used his purple eyes to track the source of the powerful fluctuation of spirit power. But to the grave god's disappointment, the result of his tracking was actually a baby girl who had just revealed her head. Was it just a child? The grave god frowned and checked his judgment over and over again, feeling that something was wrong. In the next second, he saw that the newborn baby girl actually split into a shadow and appear in front of him. She can use shadow spells at birth? The grave god smiled. To him, shadow spells weren't unusual. But in some sense, he felt that the baby girl in front of him was self-taught as soon as she was born, and in some ways could be considered a talent. She had great potential. If he captured her and trained her well, she could become his disciple or wife in the future. This was what the grave god was thinking at that moment. He then stretched out his hand to Wang Yuan's shadow with a kind smile. "Little guy, are you willing to come with me? If not, I'll blow up the earth and make you homeless." Wang Yuan didn't say anything, and just stretched out her little hand to shake his. Then, there was a crack. She tore off the grave god's entire right arm as if it were pork jerky. The grave god felt that he had done it the wrong way. Chapter 1573. Born with great strength? The grave god was even happier. He hadn't expected this little girl to actually be able to tear off his arm, and it didn't look like she had used too much strength. Therefore, looking at this scene, the grave deity didn't feel fear. Instead, he was even more determined to take this little girl as a disciple or wife. It wouldn't be bad if he could catch her and make her a child bride. But there was one thing that the grave god didn't understand. Why did this newborn girl have such great strength? But the grave god didn't think it was an urgent question. As long as he could take this girl back, there would be plenty of time for him to conduct human research. Perhaps if he cracked this secret, he might be able to find out why that kid called Wang Ling on Earth was so strong. Girl, what a pity. You're still young and destined to be no match for me. The grave god's lips curled up slightly as he gazed at Wang Yuan with his purple eyes. As countless cells divided, the arm that Wang Yuan had torn off earlier regrew at a speed visible to the naked eye along with some kind of purple mucus. For the grave god at this stage, physical damage was negligible. Even if his head was cut off and his body turned into minced meat, a new head could quickly grow back. As for physical pain, when he reached the heavenly ancestor realm, he could no longer feel pain when he was one with nature. All physical pain would be transformed into heavenly pain. Just like when Wang Wan had torn off his arm just now, the moment his arm had been torn off, a meteor had fallen from the sky at the same time. And that was heavenly pain. My venerable self must take you away today. At that moment, he looked at Wang Wan confidently as he stretched out his claws in the direction of a certain coordinate on Earth. He could see that the baby girl in front of him was nothing more than a manifestation of a shadow. There was no point in taking this shadow away, the most important thing was the real body. And now, his claws were aimed at the real body. When his hands reached out, Earth was instantly shrouded in a huge shadow that blotted out the sky and the sun. But the infinitely enlarged palm print was stopped by a tremendous force before it could get close to Earth. The grave god frowned and increased the strength of his hands, but was stunned to find that no matter how much strength he exerted, the brute force resisting him would also increase. Soon, he realized the mysteriousness of this matter. Shadow? Soon after, the grave goddess could not help but reveal an expression of pleasant surprise. After he withdrew his hand, the brute force that was resisting him also disappeared. This further confirmed the conjecture of the grave goddess. Little girl, your shadow ability seems to be stronger than I thought. You can control my shadow? The grave goddess was amazed by Wang Wan's ability. He had never seen anything like that before. He had originally thought that Wang Wan's shadow ability was very limited, but he did not expect that she could not only use this ability on herself, but she could also control other people's shadows. Today, even if I have to beat you until you're half crippled, I will still bring you back. At this moment, the grave god's eyes dimmed. Wang Wan's appearance made him extremely excited. The shadow was connected to the main body. If the shadow was injured, the main body would also be injured to a certain extent. In order to ensure the integrity of the little girl, the grave god had planned to directly deal with Wang Wan's original body. However, it seemed that he had to deal with the shadow of the little girl before him first. Otherwise, even his invasion of Earth would be hindered. Buzz! At that moment, the shadow that Wang Wan had created suddenly released endless black light that spread out in all directions. It formed a whirlpool that swallowed everything in its vicinity. The grave god didn't resist this scene. He had been fighting with the mentality of playing with a child. Seeing himself as invincible, he didn't care about any ability that a baby girl could display, because she was just a child. No matter how special her ability was, it was useless until she truly grew up. Interesting. You actually used your shadow to create a space and separate the real world? The grave god couldn't help laughing again as he sensed the changes in his surroundings. Everything had a shadow, and this vast universe was no exception. In order to prevent the grave god from destroying Earth, Wang Wan had duplicated the entire solar system and created a shadow space. The battle that took place here wouldn't affect the real world. It was the same as the battle between Wang Ling and Deng Long in the inner world. Since that's the case, I can only suppress you first. At that moment, the grave god waved his big sleeves, and there was an earth-shattering rumble. The universe in front of him cracked open, creating countless storms. He was trying to break through Wang Wan's shadow space. But the grave god had missed one thing. That was the shadow space. Although the effect was similar to the inner world, it was completely different from the inner world. Wang Wan controlled Shadow Dao. All the shadows would obey Wang Wan's commands. The grave god didn't know what the consequences of his momentary carelessness would be. Now, he was in this shadow space. What on earth was he facing, with a single thought from Wang Wan? With a single thought from Wang Wan, the rampant storms in the shadow space calmed down again. Even a gust of wind had a shadow. As long as it was in this shadow space. Wang Wan was the only true god. The grave god thought of himself as invincible, and could summon the wind and rain with a wave of his hand. But no matter how he waved his sleeves, there wasn't the slightest ripple in this shadow space. The current scene was very much like how actors and actresses in ancient Xianxia dramas would awkwardly put on all kinds of chinibyu poses after the special effects were gone. What the hell is this? The grave god frowned deeply. The calm smile that had been hanging on his face was finally completely shattered. A drop of cold sweat rolled down his forehead and down his cheek. He had never seen such a situation before, but he didn't think that he had lost. After all, he still had the Dharma treasures he had obtained from the heavenly tomb. Every single one of them was Tao Ancestor Wang's precious collection. The Supreme Chaos Artifact. Girl, now that things have come to this, don't blame me for being merciless. As he spoke, the light in the grave god's hand changed, and an ancient-looking revolver appeared in his palm. This was a chaos artifact named Great Era. The power of one bullet was enough to penetrate the distance of 10 Milky Way galaxies. And it couldn't be stopped. Everything that stood in the way of this bullet would be mercilessly pierced through, and then explode after being soaked by the power of chaos. The grave god could tell that this shadow space was very strange. If he had known, he would have been more careful. But it seemed a little too late to say that now, but it wasn't that easy to trap him. Hee, little guy, you didn't expect this, did you? Among these ancient chaos weapons, there's actually such a modern weapon. He didn't think too much. The grave god pulled the trigger of his revolver. Facing the speeding silver bullet, Wang Wan subconsciously closed her eyes, not because she was afraid of this bullet, but because she was a little confused by the dazzling light that the bullet reflected. This silver bullet successfully hit Wang Wan. Little girl Nguyen only felt as if her eyelids had been bitten by a mosquito. This silver bullet directly bounced off the little girl's eyelids, and it did not penetrate Wang Nguyen's armor. The moment the bullet was bounced off, little girl Nguyen finally smiled. It was an expression of someone who had found a new toy. She looked at the chaos weapon named Great Era in the grave god's hand, then reached out her little hand and split out a shadow to create an identical one. However, this shadow in little girl Nguyen's hand was pure black. After all, this little girl was just a newborn. She was extremely curious about everything, and her learning ability was extremely strong. She played with the Great Era revolver in her hand, then imitated the grave god's previous actions and shot a bullet at him. The grave god was stunned. He never thought that even a chaos weapon could be replicated by the little girl in front of him with a shadow. The moment this shot was about to hit the grave god's head, the grave god caught it firmly with 2 fingers. It was just a bullet. It would be a little embarrassing if he couldn't even catch it. This bullet did not hit the grave god. This made Wang Wan, who was holding the gun, a little unhappy. Therefore, the little girl took a deep breath. In the next second, this shadow revolver. In little girl Nguyen's hands, it changed again, this Great Era revolver that originally only had 6 bullets. It turned into a Gatling gun. F***CK. This shadow replica can be upgraded? The grave god looked at this scene in disbelief. Tut 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 tut. In the next second, the little girl had already controlled the upgraded weapon in her hand and fired wildly at the grave god. Chapter 1574. As a newborn baby, her curiosity towards new things and her strong ability to learn and imitate caused the goddess of the grave to suffer greatly. Moreover, Wang Wan was not an ordinary baby. Due to the support of Shadow Dao, Wang Wan was born with a powerful learning ability. For example, little girl Nguyen could not only copy the grave goddess's revolver through the power of Shadow Dao. He could also analyze the same type of matter in the entire universe through the Shadow Dao. In other words, although little girl Nguyen had never seen other firearms before, she could still use the power of Shadow Dao to draw inferences about the revolver in her hand. Using Shadow Dao to upgrade the Gatling was just a routine operation of the little girl. When she was tired of using the Gatling gun, Wang Wan could transform it into another gun with just a thought. When the Gatling shadow that was emitting black light transformed into the shape of another gun in his hand, the Gatling shadow that was emitting black light transformed into another gun form. The grave god, who had been shot into a hornet's nest but was still standing strong, recognized the rifle in little girl Nguyen's hand. It was just that this rifle made the grave god feel very strange. He had never seen this form in the real world, so he couldn't tell what model it was. He couldn't possibly fabricate one out of thin air, right? Could it be? Suddenly, the grave god, whose body was covered in holes, thought of something that shocked him. As expected, After using the other chaos tool obtained from the heavenly tomb, the myriad world's intelligent brain, to search. The grave goddess was surprised to find out that the rifle in little girl Nguyen's hand was called AK-12 Apocalypse. It was a firearm from a pay-to-win player in an FPS shooting online game. Moreover, its performance was of the gold quality. The grave goddess was completely stupefied. Equipment in a virtual game could also be synchronized. What kind of terrifying cheat was this? If there was a top-up entrance, could he do it? At this moment, the grave god's mind was spinning. The pair of purple eyes stared at the little girl in front of him, and the initial thought of, she's still a child, why don't I go easy on her, was completely dispelled. More importantly, it was replaced by jealousy. They were cultivators who had lived for thousands of years. Which one of them had not gone through untold hardships to reach this stage? However, the little girl in front of him was born with such a powerful ability. The more the grave goddess thought about it, the angrier she became. Although he had been shot by Wang Nguyen's gun and had holes all over his body, he did not feel any pain when the bullets passed through his flesh. The heavenly ancestor realm transcended physical pain, and physical damage was almost ineffective. But Wang Nguyen didn't care about that. She kept switching between different types of firearms, rifles, shotguns, and light and heavy machine guns. The endless bullets made her very happy. Little girl. I don't have time to play house with you anymore. The grave goddess shook her head as she strode forward. Killing intent rose in his heart. He felt that he shouldn't have left Wang Nguyen alive. The voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in the depths of one's soul, causing one's emotions to fluctuate. Wang Nguyen covered her ears. Against such a mental attack, the little girl still lacked combat experience. However, she tried her best to stabilize the shadow space. Don't let the space fail. Even though she lacked actual combat experience, Wang Nguyen could still sense what the grave goddess was thinking. The other party wanted to break through the shackles of the shadow space. Fighting here would be very disadvantageous to him. She stared at the grave goddess cautiously, her chubby little face full of wariness. Little girl, you are very talented. If you can be more humble, you will definitely have a bright future as my disciple. Unfortunately, you don't appreciate my kindness, so there's nothing I can do about it, the grave goddess said calmly without blushing. He clearly wanted to kill Wang Nguyen, but he was putting on such a sanctimonious attitude. As he spoke, he put on about 9 pieces of invisible armor. These 9 pieces of armor were all very powerful chaos tools, and they had the ability to conceal their appearance, making it impossible to see them with the naked eye. Of course, the most important thing was that these 9 pieces of armor had extremely strong reflective abilities. The grave goddess was sure that she was purely relying on her great Tao ability. Because he didn't know much about this little girl's strange Tao of shadows, he could easily be at a disadvantage. Therefore, he might as well take the initiative to offer himself and provoke this little girl so that she would take the initiative to attack him. He put on 9 layers of reflective armor. Each piece reflected 1000% damage. Stacked together, it was a reflection of 9000% damage. If this little girl attacked him with all her might, she might kill herself. Because he was not familiar with the Tao ability, he would be at a disadvantage. However, in terms of sinister combat experience, fighting skills, and scheming ability, the grave goddess was known as the most cunning of cunning old foxes. He was someone who had survived the ancient battles, and he had witnessed the fall of batches of geniuses with his own eyes. How could a newborn little girl be a match for his scheming? Moreover, this little girl had just been born, so even if her Tao ability was heaven-defying, in terms of strength and physical strength, the grave goddess felt that the other party might not be that powerful. His recoil was 9000% damage. This was a gamble. Although it was a little demeaning for the grave goddess to gamble with a newborn baby girl, but no one else would know about this. As long as he killed Wang Nguyen, come on, don't you want to kill me? I'll stand here and let you hit me. The grave goddess said as he took a step forward. The bullet holes on his body that were shot by Wang Nguyen earlier were gradually recovering. Looking at the approaching grave goddess, little girl Nguyen was a little frightened by this strange uncle in front of her. Boom! Before her tears were about to fall, Wang Nguyen called out, "Hey duck," and took the initiative to punch the grave goddess with her chubby little fist. She did not know why the grave goddess insisted on hitting him. She had just been born and did not understand the tricks of aliens. She had never heard of such a strange request. Huh! The grave goddess, who was originally full of confidence and planning to counterattack Wang Nguyen, suddenly felt that something was wrong. This little girl's punch was too fast, and he was slightly dazed and did not see it clearly. This punch looked ordinary, but in fact, it was shockingly powerful. It directly smashed into his chest, and a large amount of blood spurted out like a fountain with a shocking impact. Ah! The grave goddess cried out in pain. Not only was his chest pierced, but even the heavenly ancestors' pain of heaven lost its effect. He actually felt pain. And most importantly, this little girl's punch actually ignored his 9 layers of armor. The anti-damage armor on his body completely shattered. This little girl did not even lose a single hair. The promised 9,000% backlash was gone. What kind of monster is this? The grave goddess was secretly surprised. In the next breath, his body recovered again. But the pain in his chest still persisted. It was only at this time that the grave goddess realized something was wrong. It turned out that there was a hole in his shadow's chest. This little girl's punch just now seemed to hit his body, but in fact, it was an attack on his shadow. After the shadow collapsed, the pain was directly reflected back to his body. It was a kind of pain that originated from the soul and spirit. And the pain of heaven could only replace the pain of the body. The damage caused to the shadow by this punch could not be replaced. This little girl, is she still human? The grave goddess secretly gritted his teeth. The shadow was hit, and he suffered a certain degree of injury. The situation seemed unfavorable, but it was not over yet. Fortunately, he still had a trick up his sleeve. Little girl, you are very strong. I have underestimated you, but I am not easy to bully. The grave goddess snorted. Although he was trapped in the shadow space at the moment, he was not completely helpless. To catch bandits, first catch their leader. Earlier when he slapped earth with his palm, the grave goddess had split 1% of his soul. This 1% of his soul was far from the strength of his main body. But if he were to sneak into earth, it would be enough. And at this time, in front of the Wang family's small villa, the 1% grave goddess appeared at the door with his arms crossed. And his target was not Wang Nguyen's main body. This little girl was using her ability to fight him, and she could not even look after herself. Hence, 1% of the target was this villa, the source of all evil that had produced 2 universe-level monsters in a row. Chapter 1575. Although 1% of the grave god's strength was far from the main bodies, it was more than enough to deal with a few earthlings. 1% of the grave god's strength appeared in front of the villa. His evil purple eyes glowed faintly as he analyzed the entire villa. As the grave god thought, Wang Nguyen's main body was in the middle of casting the shadow spell, which couldn't be interrupted, so the little girl couldn't take care of herself at all. Now, apart from some strange gremlins, there were no other experts in this villa. The grave god had thought that father and mother Wang were very strong, but after analyzing them, he realized that this couple turned out to be muggles. They were only at the body refinement stage. After Earth had been upgraded, the level of planes had risen to a higher level. The grave god was amazed that a body refinement stage could still exist. He thought that a body refinement cultivator might be able to become the Dragon King's son-in-law in an ordinary world. But in the world of the immortal king, he didn't even deserve to live. Are they just 2 ordinary earthlings? The grave god's eyes were a little disappointed. He thought that the root of all evil, which could produce 2 cosmic monsters in a row, shouldn't be too weak. Who would have thought that they would turn out to be 2 good-for-nothings? The grave god was greatly disappointed, but at the same time he was glad. Since they were good-for-nothings, he had thousands of ways to deal with them, even if he used 1% of his strength. For Father Wang and Mother Wang, the grave god had already decided to kill one of them first as a warning to the others. He would kill the male earthling first, then, he would subdue Mother Wang and use her to threaten Wang Yuan and Wang Ling. This was the best strategy the grave god could think of at the moment. Inside the villa, Immortal Toya was relieved after Mother Wang successfully gave birth to Wang Yuan. Jean Shi and Yin Shi were still doing postpartum care for Mother Wang. In fact, it wasn't that troublesome for cultivators to give birth, and there was no such thing as confinement. Ever since Mother Wang became pregnant with Wang Yuan, the one thing the Wang family didn't lack was tonics. Just the elixirs given by Old Master's son from Huaguo Water Curtain Group were enough for Mother Wang to recover quickly after giving birth. Coupled with the golden acupuncture set given to her by Taoist priest Tai, who was known as the Dragon King of the East Sea, Mother Wang would immediately recover by today, and might even break through her realm, which she hadn't been able to do for a long time. At that moment, Immortal Toya was teaching Father Wang the method of piercing acupoints. After 10 o'clock tonight, starting from the Taijia Xian needle, acupuncture every hour will do. Understood. Father Wang nodded. After Taijia black needles is Tai black needles, then Tai Bing black needles, Tating black needles, Tai Wu black needles. I've memorized them all. That's good. Immortal Toya nodded. This was the first time he was involved in such a ritualistic delivery. Moreover, although he came to deliver the baby, he didn't actually help much. All he did was clean up and disinfect after the surgery. That was because spiritual Master Nguyen had slid out of the womb on his own and even tied a Chinese knot with the umbilical cord. Then, he inexplicably entered a meditative state, as if he had fallen asleep. Moreover, when she was born, Wang Yuan's body was clean. There wasn't even a trace of blood or filth. She looked like a little angel that had descended to the mortal world. Even with his many years of cultivation, Immortal Toya had never seen such a miraculous scene. It was said that a daughter was a father's little cotton-padded jacket. Now that Wang Yuan was born, Immortal Toya's heart was moved for a moment, and he really did want to find a partner to marry and have children with. Furthermore, it would be best if it was a daughter. How nice. Immortal Toya sighed with emotion in his heart. Congratulations again, Senior Wang, on receiving a little cotton-padded jacket. Immortal Toya cupped his hands in salute. Thank you for your hard work, Immortal Toya. Father Wang raised his hand to return the salute, but he couldn't help smiling wryly despite the joy on his face. He didn't know whether their daughter was a little cotton-padded jacket or not. But she was definitely a little explosive, and definitely wouldn't be able to get away. But Wang Yuan didn't cry or make a fuss after she was born, and looked unusually quiet, which was a little different from what Father Wang had imagined. When he had been born, he had made a fuss, but when he grew up, he had instead become autistic. There were two sides to every coin. With experience, Father Wang knew that this might be an illusion. When little girl Nguyen grew up, she might be a lively girl. Do you want to stay for dinner tonight? Father Wang asked at that moment. Immortal Toya was overwhelmed by the favor. He knew that this kind of opportunity didn't come by often, so he didn't dare refuse. Junior, it would be impolite to refuse. Don't call me Junior. Father Wang scratched his head a little awkwardly. Logically speaking, Immortal Toya was much older than him. So was grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. In the end, every time the two of them came to the Wang family's small villa, they would call him Junior, which made Father Wang feel like he didn't know what to do. He knew that this was all a figment of his imagination. He had given birth to Wang Ling and Wang Yuan one after another. Now, this group of people had imagined their whole family to be big shots living in seclusion. Father Wang had previously thought that it was good to pretend to hide their identities. But now that they were so familiar with each other, he felt that there was actually no need. Actually, I'm younger than you, and so are you and grenade throwing. There's no need to stand on ceremony, said Father Wang. Unfortunately, the concept of big shots living in seclusion was already deeply ingrained in the hearts of the core members of Battle's sect. It would probably be hard to remove it for the time being. Immortal Toya, Jr. wouldn't dare. Father Wang laid his cards on the table. I'm actually at the body refinement stage, Immortal Toya, Sr., you're joking again. Father Wang, in the kitchen, Father Wang was about to prepare the ingredients for dinner. The person working the hardest today was Mother Wang, so Father Wang decided to personally cook. It wasn't that he didn't know how to cook, it was just that he was usually too lazy to do it. At most, he would help out a little. It was only today that Father Wang wanted Mother Wang to rest for a while, so he had also taken a leave of absence from writing novels. Instead, he spent all his energy with his family. Senior, do you need help? Asked Immortal Toya. Just sit down. Father Wang smiled. He had just taken a few potatoes out of the bag and picked up a kitchen knife when the villa's alarms suddenly rang. Was it an illegal intrusion? Father Wang frowned slightly and directly went out with the kitchen knife in hand to open the villa's main door. What he didn't expect was that what greeted him was a ball of energy that looked even more dazzling than the sun. Go to hell, 1% of the grave gods had only stretched out one finger to create this extremely frightening east wind wave. It was more than enough to kill Father Wang. As long as one was hit by this east wind wave, the target would be instantly sucked into the space and crushed into pieces. The grave god felt that this single spell was the most ideal as long as it didn't cause widespread destruction. What is this? Looking at the ball of light rapidly approaching, Father Wang was so alarmed that he dropped his kitchen knife and subconsciously raised his arm to block it. Then, there was a bang. With a crisp sound, this ball of light was smashed to pieces by Father Wang's arm like a golf ball. Father Wang never thought that the Qilan arm, which Wang Ling had enlightened him before he left, would actually play a crucial role. 1% of the grave god was stupefied at this scene. Was this the freaking body refinement stage? Behind Father Wang, Immortal Toya had an adoring look on his face. Senior is too strong. I knew you were being modest all along. Father Wang, this time, it looked like he wouldn't be able to explain his identity as a big shot. Quickly kneel down and apologize to Senior Wang. Listening to Immortal Toya's words, Father Wang looked calm on the surface, but he was actually panicking. Actually, it wasn't that he couldn't understand Immortal Toya's current mood. In the other party's heart, he was a senior expert who was like an idol. Since he had a worshipping attitude, it was normal for him to unconsciously use words to protect him. This was a common rule in online public opinion battles: no one can criticize my idol. But the current situation made Father Wang very nervous, and he really didn't know how to deal with it. In the face of the grave god, the pressure on Father Wang multiplied. But at that moment, he suddenly heard an overlapping voice in his head. The mysterious voice: "Don't panic, we're here." Father Wang, ? Had he been so nervous that he was hallucinating? At that moment, Father Wang was indescribably terrified. Don't be nervous. We're your left and right hands. Hearing this, Father Wang sucked in a cold breath. F***K. His left and right hands had actually turned into spirits after being enlightened. You don't need to speak, just communicate with us in your mind. I'm left hand. You can call me Little Left, or by my name, Kato. I'm right hand. You can call me Little Right, or by my name, Eagle. You actually have your own consciousness. Father Wang was completely petrified, and his mind was in turmoil. AI, we didn't want to come out at first. After all, if you knew of our existence, you might have to ask us to help you type in the future. It's probably every author's dream to have a pair of left and right hands that can move on their own. But the situation is urgent now, so Little Right and I have no choice but to take action. So who on earth is this person? A person who claims to be the overlord of the universe, a living fossil who has lived since time immemorial. After gaining a little bit of strength, he became arrogant. Right now, his main body is fighting with the shadow clone that Anwan created in space. So, Anwan hasn't said anything until now because the shadow clone is fighting with this person's main body in space? That's right. Hearing this, Father Wang couldn't help trembling. He knew it. His daughter wasn't someone to be trifled with. She had just been born, but she had already started to maintain the peace of the universe. When she grew up, what would happen? But Father Wang had never expected that his opponent would actually be the overlord of the universe. Although the other party had given himself that title, it was obvious that he was someone with some ability. After Little Left and Little Right's awakening, Father Wang's nervousness subsided a lot. Because the following battle would be fully automated, and Father Wang didn't need to take the initiative at all. On the other side, the grave god in front of him actually didn't realize how serious the problem was. You must die today. 1% of the grave god's eyes narrowed. His arms stretched out from an extremely far distance as he suddenly grabbed at Father Wang. His 5 slender fingers were like the tentacles of an octopus as he charged at Father Wang in that instant. The grave god's movement was so fast that Father Wang couldn't predict it with his naked eye at all. But at that moment, he had nothing to fear. Because he believed in his son. And even more so in his left and right hands. He was the head of the Wang family's small villa. So when his family was in danger, he naturally had to step forward bravely and fight like a man. Charge. At that moment, Father Wang's blood boiled. He didn't say a word, but he was already roaring wildly in his heart. Mutta 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 mutta, Little Left and Little Right were even faster than 1% of the grave god. The moment they stretched out their 10 fingers, they began to split apart, and each finger actually grew hundreds of tentacles. Thousands of tentacles fell from the sky like meteors, falling down at an invisible speed, instantly destroying 1% of the graveyard god's arm. In the end, the tentacles bombarded 1% of the grave god's body countless times. 1% of the grave god's body was too horrible to look at. Smoke rose from all over its body, and it gave off a burnt smell. Then, its entire body disintegrated and scattered into dust. At the same time, in space, the grave god's true body spat out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 1577. The moment 1% of the grave god's soul was defeated by Father Wang's great chaotic fist, dying old master, the damage from the backlash was transmitted back to the grave god's body. He had never expected that the 1% of his soul that he had scattered to earth would be defeated. This result was difficult for him to accept. In fact, not to mention him, even the core members of the war sect were dumbstruck when they saw this scene. It turned out that Father Wang had decided to stand up like a man and face the 1% of the grave gods head-on. Immortal Toya broadcasted the entire battle live to the group chat of Battle Sect's core members. In the eyes of many core members of Battle Sect like Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, the seniors in the Wang family's small villa had lived modestly and ordinarily for a long time, staying at home with the air conditioner, connected to Wi-Fi, and experiencing human suffering. As far as they could remember, they had never seen Father Wang fight. But at that moment, Immortal Toya's live stream completely shattered everyone's memories, and was followed by cheers from all the core members of Battle Sect. This is Senior Wang? Senior Wang was so powerful. I've never seen him fight before. I thought he was just an ordinary person. Lightning Dharmaraja's eyes were filled with horror. He recalled the few times he had visited the Wang family's small villa to test Father Wang. In the end, because he was too timid, he did not dare to make a move. At this time, he was extremely glad that he had chickened out at that time. Fortunately, he didn't make a move. If they were to fight, would he still be alive today? This is what you don't understand, Dharmaraja. The seniors of the Wang clan are not ordinary people. I've thought so since a long time ago. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had a look of amazement and approval in his eyes, and at the same time, he deeply admired Father Wang. It was fine if he did not make a move, but when he did, it was shocking, as expected of Brother Ling and little girl Nguyen's father. A man who consecutively gave birth to 2 universe-level monsters. In some sense, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal felt that Father and Mother Wang were the strongest. In comparison, he would actually rather believe that Father Wang, Mother Wang and Grandfather Wang were very powerful people. If these 3 had all been ordinary people, then how they had given birth to Wang Ling and Wang Nguyen would probably be an unsolved mystery of the universe. Even if it was a genetic mutation, it shouldn't be this sudden. Meanwhile, on Sun Island, Lotus Sun stared at the scene before her in astonishment, deep in thought. He was one of the few people who knew that Father and Mother Wang were indeed ordinary people who didn't have the strength to truss a chicken. The girl subconsciously thought of Father Wang as the mastermind behind this attack. It had to be Wang Ling. From the content of the video, it looked a little like classmate Wang Ling's enlightening spell. Could he have enlightened Uncle Wang's left and right arms? Although Wang Ling didn't tell Lotus Sun about this. But with Lotus Sun's current understanding of the youngster, she was still able to guess most of the truth. Wang Ling was really too powerful. Uncle Wang, an ordinary person, was able to kill 1% of the grave god's soul with just a single enchantment spell. Although it was only 1%, but his opponent was a self-proclaimed overlord of the universe, an ancient being. With such a huge amount of energy, even 1% of the power was far beyond the level of the most powerful perfected immortal on Earth. It was only for an instant. Wang Ling's tall and imposing image in Lotus Sun's heart rose considerably. However, it's really shocking. Little girl Nguyen was just born, but she's actually able to restrain the grave god's true form. Wang Ming moved closer to Lotus Sun to watch the live broadcast. He was actually also a core member of Battle's sect, but he hadn't been added to the group as a way of avoiding suspicion. But this actually didn't stop him from obtaining information. If there was anything he wanted to know, he could directly ask Wang Ling. Now that Lotus Sun had been added to the group, he could also ask her about things Wang Ling didn't want to say. To put it bluntly, even if she was his future sister-in-law, she was one of them. Of course, while everyone was cheering for Father Wang and Wang Nguyen, there was one person who was out of the ordinary. This person was none other than Jai Yin. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Jai Yin had a puzzled expression on her face. It's nothing. Wang Ming took the initiative to say, it's just that little girl Nguyen was born just now, and Rong Rong is showing me a picture. Because he hadn't gotten grenade-throwing senior immortal's permission to be a core member of Battle's sect, Wang Ming had no choice but to play it safe. Ah. Little girl Wang Nguyen was born? Does this count as premature? Jai Yin was astonished. Is she very weak? Sort of, but she really isn't weak. Saying this, Wang Ming subconsciously glanced at Wang Ling listening to Jai Yin's words. He smiled bitterly in his heart. This premature baby in your eyes is now facing off against an ancient expert who claims to be the overlord of the universe. How can she be called weak? Seeing Wang Ming's expression, Jai Yin felt that she understood. Oh. I got it. Is little girl Nguyen as powerful as your younger brother the moment she makes a move? Wang Ming nodded and couldn't help pinching Jai Yin's cheek as he smiled. Factor, I realize that sometimes you're really slow on the uptake. This is too complicated. It would be hard for anyone else to accept it, Jai Yin said. Then, Wang Ming almost knelt down on the spot at her next words. By the way, how strong was little girl Nguyen when she was born? Is she already at the foundation establishment stage? Wang Ming, Lotus Sun, Wang Ling. In fact, Wang Ling had already noticed Wang Nguyen's birth in the waiting room. There was no active response. It was purely a sixth sense that stemmed from their blood relationship that made him realize that he finally had a younger sister. Far away on Sun Island, across the vast ocean, Wang Ling took a deep breath. Even from such a distance, he could smell the baby milk fragrance that came with little girl Nguyen when she was born. After having a younger sister, Wang Ling suddenly had a special feeling. He felt as if he was no longer alone. After so many years, all the loneliness and pain that had been sealed up in his heart finally had a second person to understand. A happy mood arose in Wang Ling's heart. But before this emotion could be reflected on his face through his brain nerves, it was suppressed by a force. Hence, little girl Nguyen was born. On the surface, Wang Ling seemed a lot calmer than he had imagined. This was his sister's battle. He had actually been paying attention all this time. He paid close attention to every movement of the grave god's main body, afraid that the other party would be too ruthless and hurt little girl Nguyen. But Wang Ling was actually very clear. The reason why little girl Nguyen could not wait to be born was because she wanted to challenge this powerhouse of the eternal level universe. He had thought that he would be able to help little girl Nguyen when she needed it the most. But looking at the current outcome, little girl Nguyen didn't seem to need help, but just in case, Wang Ling still left the grave god a slap. Chapter 1578. He wasn't an ordinary person. The grave god's main body furrowed his brows. After losing 1% of his soul power, the pain from the backlash caused him to furrow his brows. Because of Peng Shiren's body, the grave god had inherited the benefits of the entire heavenly tomb. But now, the grave god found that he seemed to be restrained by this physical body. In the end, it was not as useful as his original body. Because the strength of his physical body was lower than his original body, the pain of the backlash was doubled, and his flexibility was much lower than before. His heart was filled with amazement. Now, even he was beginning to doubt whether or not he could defeat this baby. I don't believe I can't kill you. The grave god's face turned pale. For some reason, the more he fought with Wang Nguyen, the more he felt like a pathetic clown. In this uneasiness, the grave god began to frantically sacrifice the chaos weapons he had obtained in the heavenly tomb. The Grand Supreme Staff. He roared, holding a 6-winged Supreme Being staff in his hand, brandishing it towards Wang Nguyen, stirring up a golden wave. Legend had it that it was made from the phoenix feathers of the time divine beast, the chaotic black phoenix. This was a wave of time that could make time pass rapidly. Those who were covered by it would be weakened and die of old age. However, to the grave god's surprise, Wang Nguyen actually used her shadow Dao to replicate a Supreme Exalt's weapon. It was just that this Grand Supreme armament wasn't 6-winged. It was 66-winged. Little girl Nguyen directly replicated and upgraded it to a Grand Supreme staff with 66 wings, and it was a plus. An even greater wave of golden aging swept towards the graveyard goddess. Not only did they devour his time waves, but they also completely covered the grave god. The pain of aging caused many cracks to appear on the grave god's young body. After the waves had passed, his skin was completely sagging and the muscles all over his body had disappeared. He was like a piece of sponge that had been drained of water and had shriveled up. However, the power of aging did not kill him. The grave god absorbed the power of chaos in the space and used it to replenish his body, bit by bit, to restore his body. Then, in the following battle, the previous scene repeated like sit-ups. The grave god sacrificed, Celestial Night Spear. Wang Nguyen copied and upgraded, Tianba Night Shock Shot Plus. The grave god summoned the Ku's shield, which was made from the skin of the most shameless author in history, Ku Xian. It released a light wave that slowed down Wang Nguyen's movements. Wang Nguyen copied and leveled up, Ancient Wood Shield. The grave god summoned, Primordial Whip. Wang Nguyen copied and leveled up, Primordial Whip Daddy. As the battle progressed, the grave goddess discovered an awkward situation. He thought he had earned the entire heavenly tomb with Peng Shiren's body. This was a very good deal. But he never thought that the little girl in front of him could use her shadow doctrine ability to replicate the eternal chaotic period that he had inherited from Heaven Tomb even if she didn't inherit it. In other words, the more chaos weapons he used in the heavenly tomb, the faster the other party would grow. Not only that, but he could also draw inferences and upgrade his Dharma artifact. No matter what kind of chaos weapon he used, it would be countered in the end. Suddenly, the grave god was shocked to find that he had become a tool. He carefully recalled the entire process from controlling Peng Shiren's body to successfully finding the entrance to the heavenly tomb and defeating the old woman guarding the tomb. The grave god's brows suddenly furrowed as she sensed that something was wrong. Because everything seemed to be going too smoothly. How could a cunning old man like Dao Ancestor Wang only send an old woman to guard the entrance to such an important place like the heavenly tomb? The grave god had fought with Dao Ancestor Wang many times, so he had a good understanding of Dao Ancestor Wang's character. Now that he thought about it carefully, he felt that all of this was a calculated trap. If that old man had predicted that after he switched to Peng Shiren's body, his combat power would actually be limited. He predicted that the enemy he would face in the future would be this strange shadow girl in front of him. He predicted that all the Dharma artifacts he had inherited in the heavenly tomb would be countered by this girl. At that moment, the grave god didn't dare to continue thinking about it. To him, Tao ancestor Wang was already dead. How could an old man whose whereabouts were unknown be able to predict what would happen today from 10,000 years ago? That was impossible. It couldn't be like this. Although the grave god didn't want to admit it, there was a little fear in his eyes at that moment. And now, the problem in front of him was Wang Yuan. At that moment, the grave god had no other choice. He had to kill the girl in front of him to prove that he hadn't been tricked by Tao ancestor Wang. After thinking about it, he directly reached out to grab Wang Yuan. He didn't believe that as a heavenly ancestor, he couldn't even deal with a newborn baby girl. If he was defeated by Wang Yuan here, he would be forever engraved in the history of the heavenly tomb. However, what awaited him was Wang Yuan's merciless ravaging. A black square engraving appeared, which looked like something that the grave god had seen in the heavenly tomb. A huge pressure turned into the word human and bombarded his body. The grave god couldn't feel physical pain, but when these engraving hit his body, a terrifying energy burst out that penetrated deep into his soul. Then, the human character engraved on his body exploded after it sank into the depths of his soul. The explosion caused the tomb god's body to explode. It was as if he had just swallowed a few firecrackers. Human Tao seal. How could she have this? The grave god was even more shocked. This was because little girl Yuan had taken out a heavenly tomb chaos weapon that he had never shown before. Human Tao seal. This was a chaos weapon that the grave god found in a golden coffin in the heavenly tomb. It was very old, and although it was very strong, it was no longer as powerful as it used to be. It was so badly damaged that it couldn't be used again. However, the grave god didn't throw it away. He planned to keep it for now, hoping to find a way to repair it in the future. In the heavenly tomb, it was damaged like the human Tao seal. However, there were many powerful chaos weapons that were once famous in ancient times. The current situation made the grave god realize that something was wrong. He had never shown this damaged item before. This girl could actually use the ability of shadow to restore it, and even repair it at the same time. At that moment, the grave god was completely silent. This was because he thought of a shocking fact that he had to admit, that was, the little girl in front of him was very likely to have used his shadow Tao ability. She had replicated the entire heavenly tomb. P.S. There's a character design of the grave god in the Easter egg chapter, but it hasn't been colored yet. It's just a sketch to complete the grave god's current appearance. This is the appearance of the grave god after he took over Peng Shuren's body and merged with Peng Shuren. In other words, part of the human's appearance belongs to Peng Shuren. Chapter 1579. The moment the grave god recognized the reality, 5 words popped up in his mind. That was, how the F***ck was he supposed to fight? He had worked so hard to obtain the right to inherit the heavenly tomb, but it had been replicated by a little girl using her own power. This was a reality that the grave god did not dare to imagine or accept. Now that he was trapped in the shadow space, he was being restricted by Wang Yuan. Coupled with the continuous impact of the human seal, the grave god's face turned pale. He did not want to lose to a baby. Therefore, he had to think of a way to get out of this predicament. An immemorial level powerhouse, a being that had existed since the beginning of the universe. Countless people had turned into ghastly white skeletons over the eons, but the tomb god was still alive. The reason behind this was most likely due to the continuous accumulation of experience and some special factors. At this moment, the grave god stared at Wang Yuan and pondered deeply. Although the current situation was extremely disadvantageous to him, he had never thought of showing his trump card in front of a girl who had just been born. He thought back to the battle between him and Tao ancestor Wang. He did not use that trump card even when he was on the verge of death. Instead, he endured it patiently. In the eyes of others, it was a psychological battle between the Eternal Realm powerhouses. The grave god knew that his final trump card was something that even Dao ancestor Wang was afraid of. Therefore, that old thing only dared to seal him separately and did not dare to kill him. That old thing knew his personality very well. If he thought that this was a dead end, he would definitely drag someone down with him. However, the current situation was not a dead end for the grave god. It was just a dead end. Just like a game of chess, he believed that as long as he played it well, he could still turn the tables. At this moment, the grave god's brows furrowed, and countless black seals seeped out of every inch of his skin, covering his entire body like crawling insects. At the same time, his evil purple eyes burst out with a shocked light, as if he was analyzing something. Immediately afterward, the grave god's face lit up with ecstasy, and he smiled again. I see. This is the power of the Shadow Dao. As if he had seen through something, he once again fell into a condescending posture. Facing the grave goddess, Wang Yuan couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. She didn't know why, but she did feel that the aura of this monster in front of her was different from before. He became much more cautious. Inside the Battle Sex Core conference room. Through the prediction, sword light, Audiobook released the image of the battle between Wang Yuan and the grave god in space. It turns out that apart from cutting vegetables, pre-cooking also has such a function. Everyone was surprised. Foresight is the sword of prophecy, the sword of destiny. Sword light itself has the ability to analyze time and space, Audiobook said. The expression on his face should have been one of pride, but the situation of the battle and the universe seemed a little off. What is that grave goddess up to this time? I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that this person is different from before. It's like there's an additional aura of the great Tao. An additional aura of the great path? Very quickly, grenade-throwing senior immortal seemed to think of something, and he abruptly raised his head. Could it be that the other party can be like Brother Ling, and finish learning one Dao in an extremely short time? Has he learned little sister Nuan's Shadow Dao? That's impossible. Many of the core members were shocked and incredulous. They couldn't understand it, because it really made their scalps go numb. But there seemed to be only one explanation for the situation in front of them. When all was said and done, the other party was eternal evil god, who had given Dao ancestor Wang such a headache back then that he hadn't been able to completely get rid of him. Having this kind of ability was unexpected, but also reasonable. While everyone was pondering this, there was another upheaval in the universe's shadow space. The originally stable shadow space was now in turmoil, as if it was about to burst open. An extremely powerful energy fluctuation was released. This was the power of Shadow Dao, without a doubt. But the most horrifying thing was that it wasn't Wang Yuan who had released this energy. There was a loud boom. The pre-broadcast image was instantly cut off. Elsewhere, in the waiting room for the Sun Island contestants. At that moment, Wang Ming suddenly felt his vision darken as a force stopped him and forced him to withdraw the brain waves he had scattered into the universe. What's wrong? Zhai Yin walked over with concern and touched Wang Ming's forehead. It was very hot, but it wasn't his limit yet. Seeing this, Lotus Sun skillfully cast the temperature-lowering spell on Wang Ming. There was a ripping sound. A large amount of white fog was instantly released from the top of Wang Ming's head. Much better. Wang Ming heaved a sigh of relief. He had been watching the battle with his brain waves just now, and had directly linked them to the nerves of little Nuan's original body. Then, he had seen little Nuan's shadow fighting the grave god. There had been no problem at first, but in the end, in that second, after the grave god's devilish smile, the nerve link had been forcibly cut off. Ling Ling, something doesn't seem right. Wang Ming said as he rubbed his head. At that moment, he saw that Wang Ling was already sitting cross-legged in a corner of the waiting room, his soul out of his body and his mind wandering. Wang Ming couldn't help laughing. It seems that someone is more anxious than I thought. But before he could finish speaking, it only lasted for a few seconds. Wang Ling withdrew his thoughts and opened his eyes again. The reason was that An Wan still wanted to fight, and had chased him away. When all is said and done, she is an immemorial expert, and her combat experience is incomparable to An Wan's. You shouldn't spoil her so much. Besides, that person has already learned Shadow Dao. Her abilities and room for growth are beyond our imagination. Wang Mingming was clearly worried. It's fine. Wang Ling shook his head. His mind had wandered off just now. Although little Nguyen had chased him away, he had made a basic assessment of the current situation. The grave god had indeed learned Shadow Dao in a very short period of time, and had indeed tried to use it to unlock the shadow space. Her learning ability surpassed that of all the opponents Wang Ling had encountered before. But unfortunately, the grave god actually didn't realize what kind of opponent it was facing. The purpose of Dao's existence wasn't just to imitate. Some people were born with heavenly Dao, but the very existence of heavenly Dao, as well as the order and rules established behind it, were all determined by the original creator. Since Wang Nguyen was the founder of Shadow Dao, she had supreme authority. Thus, it was useless even if the grave god had learned it. Because Wang Nguyen could confiscate it. Of course, the above order and rules, there was only one person in the universe who could ignore them. And that person was Wang Ling. Chapter 1580. The grave god's ability to learn was astonishing. Although Wang Nguyen had just been born, she had the memories of when she was just a cell. In Wang Nguyen's impression, before she was born, the only person in the universe who had such a strong ability to learn was her brother Wang Ling. She didn't expect the grave god to be able to analyze Shadow Dao in just a few short minutes. Furthermore, the grave god's goal was very clear. The instant he learned Shadow Dao, he immediately attacked the shadow space. The shadow space was Wang Nguyen's personal domain. If she kept fighting here, there was no way she could win. That was because the grave god's strategy was very clear. He didn't linger, but directly tore open an exit in the shadow space and fled. When Wang Nguyen chased after him, she saw an ancient decree burning in the universe outside the space, as if it was carrying out some ancient ritual. As the decree burned, a majestic horn sounded in the universe, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were attacking. For a moment, countless black ribbons crisscrossed in the surroundings. Some of the ribbons bombarded Wang Nguyen. Wang Nguyen HP -0. 001. It was hard to imagine that a newborn baby girl could actually survive unscathed in this chaotic, apocalyptic universe. This doomsday-like scene accompanied the burning of the decree. It lasted for several minutes, but it felt as long as millions of years. Wang Nguyen suddenly noticed that the surroundings were no longer like those on Earth. It seemed that the grave god had burned the decree. He had used the power of the decree to forcibly shift space. Girl, the land you're on is my core stronghold in the infinite universe. Those lowly Earth cultivators like to call places like this intrinsic spirit field, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. The grave god sneered. Above the intrinsic spirit field were the small world, the great world, and the core world. This was the ability of high-level almighty cultivators to create a world inside their bodies and construct nomological laws. If every cell in the human body was regarded as a living person, then the human body itself was an existence similar to the universe. And the universe they were in right now might just be a cell in another person's body. Of course, the ability to construct world nomological laws inside one's body was extremely strong. In such a world, the creator of the world was a god. Wang Nguyen frowned slightly. An existence even stronger than the core world was the core of chaos. It was a supreme world that was gradually built with the chaotic force of the universe as its foundation. Not many people could construct such a world. Only an ancient living fossil like the grave god could do it. Because the paramount worlds were too vast, they usually couldn't be stored in one's body. He could only choose another place to develop it. Such a mechanism was slightly similar to the Heavenly Dao experimental grounds that Dao ancestor Wang had created when he was establishing the Heavenly Dao, the unspeakable land. That was actually a type of supreme world, but it was a simplified version. The supreme world that Wang Nguyen was currently in was led by the grave god, and it was tens of thousands of times larger than the unspeakable land. The sky was shrouded in purple chaotic clouds, and the barren and cracked land was devoid of life. Such a supreme world often symbolized the heart of the Creator. On top of a barren ancient mountain, Wang Wan looked around. Every inch of land in this world was filled with graves. Written on it were all the ancient experts that the grave god had killed in the past. He was probably affected by the summoning decree and was forcibly summoned here. He was tortured by the grave god until he used up the last of his strength, lost his ancient glory, and was forever buried in the cold soil of this supreme world, after being summoned here. Although Wang Wan had already turned off the grave god's shadow path, the person in front of her no longer cared. As expected, it's just as I thought. You are the creator of this path. The grave god's eyes narrowed. When he first learned the shadow path, he had focused his energy on tearing the shadow path space, and then set up a trap for Wang Wan to enter his supreme world. His goal was clear: to break through the shadow path space. After achieving this goal, the grave god didn't mind even if Wang Wan turned off the shadow path. In this supreme world, he was the true master. Although Wang Wan had the ability to control shadows, in this world, the grave god also had the ability to control every blade of grass, every tree, and even every inch of shadow. This was not the power of the shadow path, but a type of authority that originated from the supreme world. It was equivalent to restricting Wang Wan. Little girl, the situation seems to have turned. The grave god's voice was distant and lingering. It passed through the land of this supreme world, as if it could be transmitted to the other side of the universe. He floated in the air with his hands behind his back, slowly traversing the land under his feet. Every grave here belonged to an ancient almighty that he had personally killed. Among these people, there were some who were born as geniuses, but in the end, they still lost to him. Some of the names on these tombstones had already been worn away by time. Even the grave god couldn't remember who was buried here. He had killed too many geniuses and almighties, so it was impossible for him to remember all of their names. However, these people with tombstones were at least opponents who had lasted 3 minutes against him. Those who couldn't hold on for more than 3 minutes were like small mounds of dirt in this supreme world. These people didn't even deserve to have names. Little girl, you should feel lucky, because you will soon have a tombstone with your name on it, the grave god said. He looked at Wang Wan on the top of a distant mountain. My venerable self will erect this tombstone on the highest mountain. Of all my current opponents, apart from Dao ancestor Wang, you are the one who has fought with me the longest. But once you enter this place, you won't have the chance to turn things around. As soon as he finished speaking, all of a sudden, a cacophony of voices rang out from all directions in the supreme world. It was as if millions upon millions of living beings were weeping. The powerful experts who had been buried in the ground throughout the ages were filled with a powerful sense of resentment that exploded out. It was like a flood crashing down on Wang Wan, as if the sky was falling down. Wang Wan, who had been confident in her victory, started to regret not accepting Wang Ling's help earlier. She had just been born, but her first opponent was an ancient overlord of the universe. The pressure of this supreme world was like a raging storm in her heart. Wang Wan tried her best to stabilize herself, but this terrifying resentment was too strong. It seemed a little difficult for her baby body to withstand it. A baby is just a baby in the end. The grave god sneered at this scene. Seeing Wang Wan's red face and how hard she had tried, he couldn't help feeling a little smug. The grave god pressed down with his hand, increasing the pressure again. He had thought that he would be able to take care of Wang Wan very quickly. But what the grave god never expected was that when he decided to increase the pressure for the third time, a full 5 minutes had already passed. What a monster! The grave god was astonished. Ordinary 10,000 ancient realm experts wouldn't be able to last more than a few seconds under the pressure of his paramount realm. The person with the highest record held on for about 10 seconds. But the little girl in front of him had actually lasted 5 minutes under 50% of his world pressure. Should I use all my strength? The grave god's eyes narrowed. He had never tried using 100% of his world pressure before, because it was easy to cause the world to collapse if he didn't do it properly. But to completely destroy Wang Wan now, the grave god was determined. Little girl, let's see how long you can last. The grave god didn't show any mercy. He pressed down with his hand for the fourth time, increasing the pressure from 50% to 80%. Then, he continued to increase the pressure. Under this pressure, Wang Wan finally felt a little tired. She held her breath, and a teardrop squeezed out of her red face and fell to the ground. It was also at this moment the grave god suddenly felt that his supreme world was being invaded by a foreign object. He didn't stop the pressure. Instead, he carefully observed Wang Wan. He had a feeling that the little girl wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. But the grave god didn't expect this. When Wang Wan's tears fell, on that barren ancient mountain, there was actually a tender green blade of grass that grew against all the pressure. Then, a green protective sword light seeped out of the crack on the barren ancient mountain and gently wrapped around Wang Wan. Chapter 1581. The extremely powerful sword light had a spirituality that could dispel all pressure, and instantly formed a resistance against the infinite resentment in the supreme world. The grave god was alarmed by this scene. He never expected Wang Wan's tear to actually turn the situation around at this critical moment. In the waiting room, Wang Ling observed the battle from a distance, and at the same time shared the image with Wang Ming's mind. His two elder brothers were closely watching the development of the battle. So Leng Ming is here. I see. The moment he saw that green blade of grass appear, Wang Ming felt relieved. He was pondering a question. If Wang Ling was an immortal king, then Wang Wan was an immortal sister. Then, Nguan's tear was the legendary, Sister Juice. The corner of Wang Ling's mouth twitched. He pretended that he hadn't heard anything. Leng Ming's appearance was within Wang Ling's expectations, because Leng Ming had a mechanism to begin with. Usually, it was the sword master's blood that could trigger this spirit blade that saves the master effect. This was a built-in rule for all the sword spirits produced in the Sword King world. As long as they recognized a sword master, the sword spirit would definitely appear at the necessary moment. But Wang Ling didn't want Wang Wan to be heard in the slightest. Thus, he had specially modified this rule to specifically target Wang Wan. It only took one tear to trigger this protective effect. In the Supreme World, along with Leng Ming's emerald green sword light, this barren and deathly still place seemed to glow with new vitality. The grave god was bewildered. He hadn't thought much of Leng Ming at first. It was just a small blade of heavenly tomb grass, which wasn't worthy of his surprise. But when Leng Ming appeared at that moment, the grave god had to admit that he was amazed by this blade of grass's growth. Leng Ming, who had appeared out of nowhere, looked like he had just returned from special training. He clearly had the body of a child, but he was clearly stronger than before, and he seemed to have grown a lot taller. He was wearing a grayish-green training suit with a belt tied around his waist. His whole body was filled with a kind of lively aura, like a spirit living in the forest. When the sword chi surged, Leng Ming's hair naturally floated in the air, emitting a kind of spiritual nature. With Leng Ming at the center, this barren ancient mountain was instantly covered in tender green grass. The wildfire will not be extinguished, and the spring wind will blow again. These grasses had unimaginable tenacity. In this supreme world that was filled with resentment, they were constantly being destroyed and reborn. To think that he could grow to such a level. The grave god clearly remembered Leng Ming's appearance when the Sword King realm was in chaos. It could only be said that the changes brought about by the current situation were too great. Don't you dare be presumptuous in my supreme world. The grave god became enraged, and the barren ancient mountain in front of her turned into an oasis in the blink of an eye. It made him feel extra dazzled. The graveyard goddess unleashed her final burst of power as she watched the withered and reborn grass spreading outwards like geckos. 100% of the supreme world's pressure. All of them bombarded down. In an instant, the wailing in this world grew even louder. Bitter and mournful screams and painful moans rose and fell, carrying a kind of heaven-collapsing wail. Billowing black gas surged over from the distant horizon, plunging this supreme world into an unprecedented depression. When the black gas approached, it transformed into people of all shapes and sizes. Their scarlet eyes emitted a hellish light. They were all ancient powerhouses who had been killed by the grave god. Now, they were all mobilized by the supreme world and sacrificed to become an undead army. They stood on black clouds and wore pitch-black undead armor. They were so eerie that even heaven and earth trembled. The vast undead army rushed over from afar and surrounded Wang Yuan's ancient mountain that was filled with lush greenery. There was a black mass below. Wang Yuan's ancient mountain had turned into the only oasis at this moment. It was like the last ray of light in this world that was about to be covered by endless darkness. Don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Leng Ming frowned slightly. He stretched out his strong little arm and shielded little girl Nuan behind him. His small body looked like a giant at this moment. This was also a test for Leng Ming. His first battle after returning from cultivation was already a situation like this. However, he was not frightened by the hellish scene in front of him. Instead, he kept thinking about the combat skills that his master and mistress had taught him during the special training. At the same time, he was measuring the gap between his side and the grave god's combat strength. This was the grave god's supreme world. In this world, the grave god could do anything he wanted. We can't waste time here. We have to find a way to split open this world. Leng Ming said this after some serious thought. The grave god laughed on the spot and clutched his stomach, as if he had heard the funniest joke in all of eternity. Do you think my supreme world is a watermelon? You want to split it open? Don't forget, you're just a blade of grass. Shut up. How would I know if I don't split it open? Leng Ming was in high spirits and refused to admit defeat so easily. Boom. At that moment, the undead army was even closer in the distance. The murderous aura of a deep sea of blood swept over with a destructive pressure. This was an unimaginable deterrent. Leng Ming was deeply shaken by the powerful fluctuations. He had never felt this level of pressure before. Even when he had been hit by Jinka and by Qiao's combined attacks, it hadn't seemed to be as great as this. Do you feel the gap? At that moment, the grave god slowly stretched out his hand, curled his fingers, and slowly closed his palm. With every inch of strength he exerted, the fluctuations of energy grew stronger. It felt like there was no end to it. Leng Ming started to get nervous, but he still persevered. He had come to protect Wang Yuan, and also to show off the results of his special training. He didn't want to embarrass his Shifu. Hey! At that moment, Wang Yuan slowly crawled over and lay on Leng Ming's back. The soft touch had the milky scent of a baby, and Leng Ming's little face instantly turned red. Ah Yuan, in that instant, Leng Ming felt reassured. It wasn't just him, Wang Yuan felt the same way. Because of Leng Ming's appearance, the pressure from the supreme world had been split into two. Wang Yuan and Leng Ming were now sharing the pressure of this world equally, and had become each other's salvation. Wang Yuan didn't say a word, and hugged Leng Ming's neck like a soft plaster. In the next moment, the little girl's eyes turned sharp. Leng Ming instantly understood. The real counterattack was about to begin. Although little girl Nuan had just been born, her strategic thinking was exceptionally clear. She added the power of her shadow Dao to Leng Ming's body, and in a split second, the tender green grass that had been spreading all around them started to spread out at an extremely fast speed. The speed at which it spread was extremely astonishing, and it formed a green wave that collided with the grave god's undead army. She's actually using the shadows of these grass to counteract the withering effect. The grave god was shocked. He never thought that the little girl in front of him and that little grass would actually have such an unexpected effect. If this went on, his supreme world would be completely green. Chapter 1582. The grave god's expression changed. The overflowing green light in the supreme world started to spread, and the pressure of the world and the resentment of the army of the dead seemed to be naturally restrained. Wang Yuan and Leng Ming had a tacit understanding, and they instantly turned the situation around, which surprised everyone. A compass appeared in the grave god's hand, and his murderous aura soared as he gathered all his energy to resist the green light that had suddenly appeared in the supreme world. The two energies collided, and clanging sounds rang out, like the sound of the great Tao sweeping through the entire world. A black and purple bolt of lightning shot into the sky. The compass in the grave god's hand was formed from the core of the supreme world, and it was like the rudder of a captain on a giant ship. He had never used the full pressure of the world before, so he had to control the compass himself to make it more stable. No one can act presumptuously in my world. Gritting his teeth, he gripped the compass tightly and tried to put on a high and mighty posture as he released all his energy to stabilize the situation in the supreme world. Watching this scene from a distance, Wang Ling felt that the grave god was particularly miserable at that moment. He was like those emperors in TV dramas who had experienced coups but had no choice but to wave their golden swords helplessly. "Get down here!" Leng Ming shouted at that moment. His childish voice carried a kind of manly determination. There was a bang. The green light soared into the sky like a bonfire that lit up the gloomy world. Pooh! The grave god spat out blood and fell to the ground. He tried to steady himself, not wanting to kneel down. The core compass in his hand actually cracked under the combined pressure of Leng Ming and Wang Yuan. Who would have thought that a newborn baby and a sword spirit who had just been born and had only gone through a few rounds of special training would actually be fighting a living fossil who stood at the top of the universe? Moreover, they were clearly in the opponent's supreme world, but they were still able to suppress him. The grave god was astonished. This was clearly his supreme world. He was clearly the only god here, but these two kids had actually turned the tables on him. At that moment, Wang Yuan was lying on Leng Ming's back, as if she and her sword had become one. The grave god's expression changed. This little girl was terrifyingly strong. Even though she had just been born, her strength was unfathomable. Even though she had never had any combat experience, she had a strong learning ability and had grown rapidly in battle. He was like an old general who had been on the battlefield for a long time. He fell into a daze as he looked at Wang Yuan and Leng Ming. Rumble. The ground of the paramount world began to tremble. Powerful energy surged into the ground, and countless green lights were released from the cracks like fountains. The cracks on the core compass became even larger. The grave god found it hard to believe. The supreme world that he had painstakingly built for so long was about to be lost. Wang Ming was already completely stupefied. With Leng Ming around, little girl Nuan was like a tiger that had grown wings. He had thought that little girl Nuan might need his help to kill this grave god, however, he did not expect that this lass could do it alone. In some sense, he felt that little girl Nuan had actually been stronger when she had been born than Wang Ling. Unfortunately, she had been born 16 years later than Wang Ling, and this gap wasn't something that Wang Yuan could make up for just by relying on her powerful growth ability. Wang Ling's growth ability was also very heaven-defying, and was becoming more and more so. However, the reason why Wang Ming was watching this battle wasn't to compare who was stronger and who was weaker, or just to join in on the fun. Because of his research on the Black Stone, he felt that he could look for inspiration from little girl Nuan, who had just been born, and find a way to crack it. At least, that was what he had thought at the beginning, but now, as he watched the battle, his mind was blank. This fully verified the classic line, "Unfortunately, I'm uncultured, so I can walk the world with one F***K. The little girl was too strong, so strong that Wang Ming found it inconceivable. He had actually guessed that Wang Yuan probably wasn't a normal human being, but he had never thought that this lass would flip over the grave god's table as soon as she had been born. "For all you say, I'll split open this world, so I'll show you." At that moment, Leng Ming's roar rang out in the paramount world once more. His tiny body had an aura that could devour thousands of li, shattering all the haze in this world. A green sword light the size of a grain of rice condensed on Leng Ming's fingertip like a seed. Then, like dew, it slowly dripped down to Leng Ming's feet. In an instant, sword chi filled the sky. The invisible sword light shot up from under Leng Ming's feet. At first, it was only the height of a small blade of grass, and then it shot up rapidly. Indomitable. So dazzling that the grave god collapsed. In a split second, it illuminated the paramount world. A subversion had officially begun. Leng Ming's sword chi was too strong, especially with Wang Wan lying on his back to transmit energy to him. It was like a clip-on power bank charging a phone. The most powerful clip-on power bank in the universe. This made the already astonishing sword chi even more frightening. In an instant, sword chi crisscrossed the paramount world, and hundreds of millions of divine lights tore through the sky, illuminating every dark corner. The army of the dead summoned by the grave god also stopped moving. They had been struggling and roaring in pain as they closed in on Wang Wan and Leng Ming with the momentum of a magnificent army, eager to tear Wang Wan and Leng Ming to pieces. However, at this moment, a miraculous scene appeared. These undead spirits that were summoned by the grave god froze as if they had been petrified. In this paramount world that was filled with Leng Ming's sword chi. All of them looked up at the green light in the sky, deep in thought. After a few seconds, Wang Wan and Leng Ming both noticed that the murderous red light in these people's eyes had disappeared. It was as if they had been purified. This scene made Leng Ming hesitate. He did not make a move. Instead, he stood on the spot and watched this scene. He could feel that the pain in the hearts of these powerhouses who had been forcibly turned into dead spirits was being released bit by bit. He had originally wanted to use his own sword chi to sweep these people away. However, he did not expect that these dead spirits still retained a trace of humanity. Then let's transcend. Leng Ming sighed in his heart. He watched as many undead creatures in front of him turned into golden particles of light under his sword aura. Only then did he realize that these poor souls who had been trapped in this supreme world by the grave god had finally ushered in their own reincarnation after countless years. This was supposed to be a heartwarming scene. But at that moment, a mighty voice rang out. Kill! The grave god roared and attacked his army of the dead. You're all mine. I want you dead. You have to die. Losers like you only deserve to eat dust, not to be reincarnated. Don't get in their way. Leng Ming frowned. It looked like he was really angry. He clenched his small fist and swung it at the grave god. Boom! The green sword light turned into fist intent which swiftly rushed over from a distance and struck the grave god's body, instantly sending him flying. Wang Ling watched this scene from a distance. From his point of view, it felt like he was picking out a tiny ant from a sea of green. Chapter 1583. In this green ocean, the grave god was as tiny as a grain of sand. It was hard to imagine that this was happening in the grave god's own supreme world. He had thought that he was invincible in this supreme world, but he had never expected to be devoured by two children. This was an extraordinary humiliation. The grave god had never experienced this before. He struggled in the green ocean, and looked like he was in agony. Leng Ming controlled the sword chi to slowly cut through the ocean, and at the same time, approached the grave god. There was horror in the grave god's eyes, because he suddenly realized that he couldn't move. It was as if the green sword chi around him had grown countless hands to hold him in place. Guillotine. The grave god's pupils instantly widened as he thought of something. Hearing this, Leng Ming couldn't help but ponder. When all was said and done, he was an ancient living fossil, and indeed had more experience than most people. This move was called Green Grass Guillotine, or Green Grassland Guillotine. It was a spell that his Shifu Bai Qiao had customized for him based on his own characteristics. Supposedly, she had been inspired by a certain game, originally called Noxus Guillotine. All spirit swords had their own signature sword skills based on their characteristics. For example, his Shifu Jinka's signature sword skill was the world-annihilating sword. And this green grass guillotine was the signature that Bai Qiao had created for Leng Ming. Leng Ming never thought that he would be able to use it in actual combat so soon after learning it. At that moment, the vast green ocean formed from sword chi had already firmly enveloped this supreme world, and also restricted the grave god's movements. The green grass guillotine had already formed. Neither his body nor his soul could escape. This was a situation of certain death. Boom! As countless undead soldiers were purified and entered the cycle of reincarnation, the green sword chi that had been drifting slowly through the ocean pressed down and slashed at the grave god's frozen body. It only lasted for a split second. The grave god's body was split in two by the green light, and an extremely turbulent aura of primordial chaos poured out of his body. The energy inside him was astonishing. Leng Ming felt like he had cut into a big furnace that was about to explode. Very quickly, the grave god exploded, and a huge mushroom cloud rose with the grave god at the center. The shockwave from the explosion spread for billions of miles, as if it had spread to a very far place. Is everything over? Leng Ming looked at the scene before him and heaved a sigh of relief. He could sense that the aura of the grave god had disappeared. A universe-level figure of a generation, an existence at the level of an eternal living fossil, had perished along with the collapse of a supreme world just like that. It was truly a surreal feeling. Meanwhile, on the other side. After the grave god's aura disappeared, many people sensed it at the same time. In the infinite galaxy, Monk Golden Lamp was being treated by Crispy Noodles Dao Monarch. Wang Ling was a little worried about his serious injury, so he sent Crispy Noodles to take a look at him. When the monk arrived at the scene, he was covered in blood. He did not even have the strength to use the Buddha fire. Fortunately, Crispy Noodles Dao Monarch arrived in time. Thank you for your trouble, Dao Lord. Jin Deng sighed inwardly. In front of the grave god at his peak, Tyrant realized that he had no strength to fight back. He was still lacking in many areas. In the future, he would have to make full use of his time to cultivate. It's fine. Crispy Noodles Dao Monarch gave a gentle smile. Spirit light appeared in his palm and enveloped Tyrant. The truth was that he was just transferring the spirit power in his body to Tyrant, which acted like a power bank like Wang Yuan. After receiving enough spirit power, Tyrant had the ability to recover from his injuries. His aura really disappeared. At that moment, Tyrant raised his head and looked in a certain direction. That was the location of the grave god's supreme world. As an old enemy, the grave god's death made Tyrant recall a lot of things for a moment. It wasn't that he felt pity for him, but that it was a little strange. He had always felt that this old guy wasn't someone who could be killed so easily. In the astrolabe, Dusk and Peng Shiren, who were tightly connected to Tyrant and couldn't get away, also sensed that the grave god's aura had disappeared. He's dead. Peng Shiren's eyes were full of tears. F***K. How did he die? Why are you crying? Aren't you ashamed? Dusk glanced at Peng Shiren distractedly. Peng Shiren stomped his feet in anger. That's my body. He didn't give it back to me after using it, he actually exploded with it. Dusk was momentarily speechless. He didn't know how to comfort Peng Shiren. But as he listened, it seemed like Peng Shiren was the most pitiful person in this entire matter. His body was taken by the grave god, and his right to inherit the heavenly tomb of Wang Dao ancestor was taken away. Now, the right to inherit the heavenly tomb was gone, and so was his body. Most importantly, the grave god didn't leave behind a will before he died. There were so many treasures in the heavenly tomb, but now, they were all ownerless. Peng Shiren couldn't get them, so he could only watch. He planned so many things just to do something big, but in the end, he didn't get anything. Everything was for naught. It's not difficult for a progenitor to reconstruct a body. It just needs a little more time, Dusk said. Perhaps Peng Shiren's actual cultivation level had already reached the progenitor realm. This was the only good news. The reconstructing of a progenitor's body could be completely handed over to the bronze cat in the forsaken land of the gods. It just needed a long time. He knew that Peng Shiren was an impatient person. He probably couldn't wait any longer. This wait will take thousands of years. Peng Shiren felt pain in his heart. The feeling of being schemed against by the grave god was very strong. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have listened to that evil god's nonsense. But it was already too late to say anything now. Just as he was about to completely fall into isolation. Dusk said, if you truly reflect on yourself, you might still have a chance. Peng Shiren said, what do you mean? Dusk said, with my understanding of that evil god, he didn't even finish using that trump card. It's too strange that he died just like that. Peng Shiren couldn't help but feel surprised. Because what Dusk said was indeed the truth. But, what is his trump card? Before the monk left, he told me, but I don't know if I'm right. Peng Shiren frowned deeply. Unfortunately, your answer should be right. Dusk said, but he can't completely use that trump card now. He only used some methods to obtain a 10,000th of its power. Back then, Lord Dao Ancestor split up and sealed his soul, and sealed the more dangerous half of his soul in the heavenly tomb to separate that power. But what is that thing used for? I don't know the specifics. Neither the monk nor I have seen it. But since the Dao Ancestor determined it to be a threat, it must be terrifyingly powerful. At this moment, in the supreme world that was about to collapse, Ling Ming floated in the void with Wang Yuan on his back. With the death of the grave god, this supreme world also fell apart at the same time. He stayed here for a while, using his sword energy to control this supreme world into a stable state of collapse. This was to prevent the rampaging sword energy from directly exploding this supreme world after he left. If that was the case, many innocent beings might be harmed. But soon, Ling Ming felt that something was wrong. The supreme world that was originally collapsing. It actually stopped, a dangerous aura assaulted them. This made Wang Yuan feel that the originally calm atmosphere had become tense again. She wrapped her arms around Ling Ming's neck and grabbed his clothes tightly. Ling Ming frowned deeply. At this moment, he was staring ahead. He finally found it. It was at the place where the grave god had disappeared. There was a piece of purple flesh the size of a fingernail wriggling and gradually expanding. Chapter 1584. Although Wang Yuan and Ling Ming were already mentally prepared and felt that the primordial heretic god wouldn't be killed so easily, they were still very surprised when they saw the evil piece of flesh wriggling again. We have to strike first before it takes shape. Ling Ming frowned slightly. He wasn't stupid enough to wait for the grave god to really resurrect. There was no such thing as a melodramatic plot. Sun and moon sword light. Ling Ming raised his fingers, and a green aurora shot out from his fingertips, which blossomed like lightning in the air. The energy was even more dazzling than lightning. It gave rise to an astonishing power. It accurately collided with the purple piece of flesh. This, sun and moon sword light, was Ling Ming's original power, and its name implied that a blade of grass could cut down the sun, the moon, and the stars. This was Ling Ming's other unique skill apart from the grass guillotine. The difference was that it wasn't taught to him by Jinka or by Qiao. Ling Ming had comprehended it himself. The two quickly rubbed against each other, and then there was a big explosion. Ling Ming's sword qi collided with the squirming piece of purple flesh, creating a terrible glow and extremely high temperature that seemed capable of melting everything. However, when the smoke and dust cleared, not only wasn't the purple piece of flesh destroyed, it even swelled up. An Wan. Help me. Ling Ming didn't believe it, and launched a second attack. He called out to An Wan. Little girl Nwan wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, and the universe's most powerful power bank was exerted again. 100 times. Sun and moon sword light. With An Wan's help, the dimension of the second sun and moon sword light increased again, and it carried a destructive power that could pierce through the universe. However, when the sword pillar of destruction, which was 300 meters in diameter, struck the piece of flesh, everything was like a clay ox that had sunk into the sea, and peace was restored once more. It had been clearly the size of a fingernail before. After Ling Ming's first attack, it had directly grown to the size of a palm. And now, with this second attack, it had actually grown to the size of a ku xian. Is it absorbing my sword qi? Ling Ming was alarmed. He had never encountered such a situation, and felt that it was very strange. This evil god wasn't an orthodox earth cultivator to begin with, but an alien creature. He felt that the scene in front of him might be related to the alien bloodline of this evil god. He could even rely on absorbing energy to reconstruct his physical body and wait for his resurrection. What kind of monster was this? This doesn't look like an ordinary cultivator's ability. Wang Ming was also thinking as he watched this scene from a distance. Although he didn't know what the grave god's bloodline was, he couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity when he looked at the purple piece of meat. Especially when the purple piece of meat grew tentacles. Great old rulers. This was Wang Ming's first reaction. Legend has it that this is a powerful and ancient existence in the universe. Its existence is composed of unknown substances and laws that are far beyond the understanding of the mortal world. Therefore, the laws of the ordinary human cultivation world may not have any effect on it. For a long time, in the hypotheses about universal civilizations, there had been a stronger and more ancient civilization before the civilization of the cultivators was established. The ancient gods known as the Great Old Ones were the same. It was just that Wang Ming had only seen these things in related papers and books, and had never thought that they actually existed. At that moment, looking at this scene, Wang Ling had a few guesses in his heart. The mysterious object called Heavenly Mandate, which Nightmare had mentioned earlier. Looking at it now, the grave god had probably obtained part of that mysterious object's power. It was also this power that had reactivated the ancient god bloodline in the grave god's body, which had been diluted by the passage of time. In other words, the biggest trump card the grave god had always relied on was that he wasn't a part of Tao. Just like Wang Ling's king's eye. The laws of the ordinary cultivation world had no way of restraining these strange ancient gods of the universe. Now, Wang Ling finally understood Tao ancestor Wang's good intentions in sealing this mysterious object. He was worried that the old civilization of the universe would be revived because of this mysterious object, which would have a further impact on human cultivation civilization. At that moment, Wang Ling suddenly had a very interesting and dangerous idea. If this mysterious object was combined with a human cultivator without any ancient god bloodline, what kind of chemical reaction would occur? Wang Ling didn't show any emotion on his face. But he still had to admit that he was excited at that moment. He had been searching for an answer all along. That was, what on earth was his king's eye? Now, he felt that he might be able to find a new answer from this lump of flesh that the grave god had turned into, as well as that mysterious object. An Wan is in danger. This thing is too strange. Wang Ming subconsciously tensed up at the sudden change in the situation before him. He turned to look at Wang Ling. The youngster's mind had already wandered off once more, but this time, An Wan didn't chase him away. At the same time, the supreme world, which had already stopped collapsing, was being reorganized as countless dark fragments circled and flew around. These fragments were like a puzzle, and had a dark and destructive aura. The grave god hadn't completely revived, but that lump of flesh had already become infinitely large. It was the size of a sports stadium that could fit 100,000 people, and it floated in the air. Its purplish-black body was covered in some disgusting and unknown green viscous liquid, and it was surrounded by terrifying and complicated tentacles. Leng Ming knew. This terrifying resurrection ritual hadn't stopped yet. He had to stop the resurrection before the grave god Type 2 was completely formed. But at that moment, Leng Ming realized that he actually couldn't move under the enormous pressure. The terrifying creature in front of him had transcended time and time, and it actually instinctively gave rise to fear in his body. Rumble. One sound. At that moment, boundless holy light fell from the sky in the supreme world of shifting winds and clouds and boundless darkness. This was a new summon from the lump of flesh of the grave god. Wang Wan and Leng Ming saw human silhouettes appear in the descending holy light. Their faces couldn't be seen clearly, and they were all black and very tall, at least dozens of feet tall. Their upper bodies were human, and their lower bodies were tentacles like those of an octopus. Their faces were shimmering with a mysterious veil, and they looked extremely kind and benevolent. However, Wang Wan could clearly feel the endless surging brutality behind the veil. These were the guards for the resurrection ritual. Immemorial eternal, huh? At that moment, a familiar figure landed in front of Wang Wan and Leng Ming. Ling Zhenren. Lang Ming's eyes were glazed over. When he saw Wang Ling appear, he suddenly felt the pressure instantly disappear. Hey. At that moment, Wang Wan climbed onto Lang Ming's shoulder with her fair little legs, and then jumped onto Wang Ling's back. Wang Ling felt a warm sensation from Lang Ming's body to Wang Ling's. Before coming here, Wang Ling had initially refused to cooperate with little girl Nguan. This ancient god of the universe in front of him wasn't an ordinary creature. It was stranger and more difficult to deal with than any of his previous opponents, and he was worried that Wang Wan would get hurt. But at that moment, Wang Ling changed his mind. Do you want to go too, Anwan? Wang Ling asked telepathically. Yeah. Little girl Nguan took the opportunity to lie on Wang Ling's shoulder like a soft pastry. Wang Ling felt as if his heart had melted. He suddenly felt that brother and sister mixed doubles wasn't bad either. Chapter 1585. These mysterious civilizations that had emerged from the very beginning of the universe seemed to symbolize the profundity and endless fear of the universe itself. Just by standing there motionlessly, they gave people a great sense of pressure and fear. This kind of fear came completely from the spiritual level, especially when it was beyond the common sense of an ordinary person. For example, before Wang Ling had appeared, Lang Ming had been intimidated by this mysterious and unfathomable power. It was as if it could directly penetrate the depths of one's mind. It wasn't until Wang Ling had appeared that Lang Ming's gradual loss of reason was forcibly pulled back. The spiritual pressure exerted by the ancient rulers could be said to be natural. This was an innate ability that they had as the creators of the early universe civilizations. If one spent too much time with these ancient gods in the same space, it was extremely easy for one's mind to collapse. Once this collapse reached a certain threshold, one would completely lose their mind. Wang Ling counted the immortals, who had been summoned by the resurrected god of the grave. There were more than 80 of them. These eternal beings were cloaked in holy shimmering light and shrouded in golden holy light. They didn't seem to have the slightest evil aura, and were like gods of the old universe, exuding an indescribable majesty. The primordial immortals moved their countless tentacles slowly forward. Wang Ling's face was as calm as an ancient well, but Wang Wan looked very uneasy. Seeing this, Lang Ming transformed back into his Xiaoqiao form and stood on little girl Nguan's head. Like a protective talisman, he emitted a green protective sword membrane. Even though Wang Ling was here, the scene in front of him still made Lang Ming feel uneasy. He had chosen to protect Wang Wan as a double insurance to avoid a situation where he couldn't take care of Wang Wan if a fight broke out later. This small action was exceptionally heartwarming. It made Wang Ling even more certain of his decision to choose Lang Ming back then. Wang Ling paused at the top of this ancient mountain for a moment. Gazing at the eternal beings who were wriggling toward him, he could indeed feel an increasingly powerful spiritual pressure. This supreme dark world, which was on the verge of collapse, had reached a strange balance with this group of summoned ancient rulers. Darkness, holy light, chaos, decay, these complex forces were intertwined. At that moment, apart from these old rulers and Wang Ling's group, there were no other living beings in the supreme world. But as he stood on the ancient mountain, he could clearly hear the screeching of countless crows in front of him, which sounded like the moans and cries of witches, constantly reverberating in his ears. It was indeed an extraordinary item. Wang Ling couldn't help but sigh with emotion. After all, in this universe, apart from the nightmare of not having crispy noodle snacks to eat, there were very few things that could give him enormous pressure. However, the pressure exerted by the great old ones in front of him was real. It was like he had never felt pain since he was a child, but now, he finally felt like he had been bitten by a mosquito. Chi! In the distance, under the illumination of the holy light, these primordial eternals who were slowly moving forward turned into layers of black shadows. It was hard to tell which one was real and which was real. With a hum, one of the primordial immortals suddenly appeared in front of Wang Ling and Wang Ling from a great distance away in a flash. Boom! There was a loud noise, and a powerful aura of chaos filled the air. It was incomparably dazzling, with the smell of annihilation. A huge pillar of light erupted with heat and powerful energy. Wang Ling raised his hand and cut off this blazing light of annihilation. With just a light wave of his hand, it had the effect of parting the sea, and the energy of annihilation instantly dispersed. Wang Ling never thought that these primordial immortals would actually try to destroy him in this way. This further proved that the grave god, who was about to awaken and evolve into its second form, wasn't an ordinary, old ruler. It was very likely that it was a top existence among the great old ones, or perhaps a powerful outer god. Or perhaps it was the head of the legendary omniscient and omnipotent demon gods, the so-called core source of chaos. Wang Ling was suddenly a little curious about the grave god's growth. These primordial immortals in front of him weren't weak, and even the patriarchs of those Tao god-level clans in the domain of the gods wouldn't be easy to deal with. But these primordial immortals seemed to have gone mad, and were using this self-destructive method to try to drag Wang Ling down to hell with them. Wang Ling took a deep breath. When the second primordial immortal self-destructed in front of his eyes, he felt that he couldn't wait any longer. Because if he continued to self-destruct like this, he felt that it would scare little girl Nuan. In addition to being very strong, these primordial immortals actually had one thing in common: they were ugly. His little sister had just been born. It would be terrible if she was traumatized by her childhood. But the truth was that these primordial immortals had in fact only just been born after being summoned. They didn't know that what they were about to face would also be traumatized by their childhood. At that moment, Wang Ling stood on the ancient mountain, a golden aura flowing around him. He wasn't a tall teenager, but his body exuded a great sense of majesty. As the red centipede spun, the three-petaled golden lotus in his eyes bloomed, and an overwhelming sense of oppression engulfed everything in front of him like raging waves. As far as the eye could see, everything was reduced to ashes. No one could withstand Wang Ling's destructive power. The benevolent and amiable attitudes of these primordial immortals, who were draped in golden holy light, began to completely change. They lost their last bit of dignity, and their shrill screams made all living beings tremble. Wang Ling's eyes emitted a terrifying beam of destruction. The astonishing power of the pupil seemed to have the power to reach eternity, and it could destroy everything. This gaze could be said to be impeccable. His gaze swept across the sky like a bolt of lightning to destroy the world, and the summoned primordial immortals fell to their knees. It didn't matter how distinguished they used to be, or how powerful the legendary gods they were. In front of Wang Ling, they could only kneel. In an instant, all the primordial immortals died. They disappeared in their own holy light and were annihilated into ashes. The moment the king's eye released its power of the pupil, the evolving grave god had mobilized these primordial immortals in front of him to fend off this fatal attack. Wang Ling didn't want to let the grave god off. He stared in her direction and tried to gather his power of the pupil again. However, the grave god's resistance was even fiercer than he had imagined. In this supreme world, countless dark doors opened again, and a nameless fog formed in the air. This was a fog that ordinary eyes couldn't penetrate, and anyone who fell into it would be surrounded by darkness. Then, they would instantly lose all sense of reason. Strange creatures with giant compound eyes and countless tentacles around their bodies poured out of the door in droves. Like a swarm of bees coming out of their nest, they charged in Wang Ling's direction with no regard for their lives. This was another type of primordial immortal, and was called the ultimate hunter. They weren't as big as the previous primordial immortals, but there were so many of them. Even though they knew they were going to die, they still blew their horns in Wang Ling's direction. Nuan would definitely be afraid. Wang Ling couldn't help feeling a little worried. He tilted his head slightly and watched Nuan's expression closely. At that moment, little girl Nuan was staring at these strange creatures flying at her at top speed, sucking her fingers and swallowing. Wang Ling, ? Chapter 1586. From a distance, the hunter of the end did indeed look like an octopus, but Wang Ling didn't have an appetite. No matter how hungry he was, he wouldn't have such a thought. But Wang Nuan clearly didn't think that way. Looking at the hungry child next to him, Wang Ling's heart was inexplicably conflicted. Speaking of which, little girl Nwan hadn't even had a sip of warm milk since she was born, and she had been in a hurry to fight this self-proclaimed overlord of the universe, grave god. Wang Ling felt that his little sister really hadn't had it easy. Since she was hungry, then she would eat. But would these octopus-like hunter of the end really taste good? Wang Ling had his doubts all along. Rumble. Up ahead, more and more hunters of the end emerged from the nameless fog, numbering in the tens of thousands. They were shrouded in a faint layer of black light, and their evil compound eyes were bloodshot as they bulged like huge millstones. Apart from that, there were other great old era creatures that were constantly coming out from the cracked earth. Earth-drilling demon worms, giant devouring worms, ancient wood mystic worms, these were existences that had only appeared among the gods of the ancient universe, and now they were all here. Like bamboo shoots after the rain, a dense horde of insects emerged from the earth. At first, there were only a few of them, but in the blink of an eye, they exploded like a geyser. In order to protect the evolving grave god, they had actually triggered round after round of gods that had only appeared in the ancient universe. Watching this scene from afar through the shared vision of the king's eye, everyone's hearts trembled. Lotus Sun covered her slightly agape mouth with her hand to hide her astonishment. This scene in front of her was definitely a trypophobia nightmare. She had never seen or heard of these terrifying ancient creatures, and just looking at them made her hair stand on end. Especially when the millions of demon worms, and mystic worms on the ground arched their bodies and moved forward at an accelerated speed. Lotus Sun could clearly see the thick purple-green mucus on the abdomens of these insects. When the insects were next to each other, the stomach-churning mucus intertwined and separated with a terrifying effect. Wang Ming's scalp went numb when he saw this scene. These old rulers of the ancient universe were beyond his understanding, and as the strongest brain on earth, Wang Ming was also trying hard to understand what was happening in front of him. At that moment, the Golden Lamp monk, who was in the midst of recuperation, rose as well. He saw what was happening in the supreme world through the swastika. Looking at your expression now, monk, it seems that what happened now is beyond your expectations. Crispy Noodles Dao Monarch saw it very clearly. As a real clone, he was an independent individual, but as long as Wang Ling agreed to his request to connect to the king's eye, he could also share his vision. There was actually a certain difference between Crispy Noodles Dao Monarch and Wang Ling, but when faced with this apocalyptic scene, they were surprisingly unperturbed. Tyrant frowned. I can roughly guess that he has obtained part of the mysterious item's power. Perhaps he would not die so easily. However, I didn't expect him to have the bloodline of an ancient universe god. Tyrant once had a partial understanding of the civilization of the great old ones from Dao ancestor Wang's speech. That era had happened a long time ago, far before the civilization of human cultivators, but for some reason, that profound ancient civilization had been completely annihilated. No one knew what on earth had caused such a powerful civilization in ancient times to be destroyed in an instant. As a symbol of the ancient universe civilization's past existence, the mysterious item that Dao ancestor Wang had discovered was one of them. Back then, His Excellency Dao ancestor knew how dangerous it was, which was why he tried to seal it. The monk said, it was said that when it was discovered, it was just an ordinary stone. His Excellency Dao ancestor kept the stone with him, and after a while, he heard a heartbeat coming from inside the stone. Heartbeat? Crispy Noodles Dao Monarch rubbed his chin and felt that he had heard something very interesting. So, this mysterious item called destiny is actually a fossilized heart left behind by an outer god in the ancient universe? This poor monk is not sure. Elsewhere, in the supreme world shrouded in chaos, the battle was still going on. Wang Ling felt a little uncomfortable looking at the densely packed insects on the ground. He took a deep breath, and the Naiwan palace in his mind shook. Boom! A loud, invisible sound spread out from Wang Ling and reached the minds of every living being in the supreme world. For a moment, space froze, and even time seemed to come to a standstill. Everything in front of them froze. Those hunters of the end in the air who were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, as well as the crawling worms on the ground, were all petrified in that moment and didn't move at all. This was only 5% of Wang Ling's mental pressure, but when it was released, it was enough to intimidate everyone present. This was the pressure that Wang Ling usually felt when he was a functional body, as well as when he was on tenterhooks all day long for fear that he would destroy the world with too much force. It didn't seem like too much pressure, but after accumulating for a long time, it could reach a very frightening level. But Wang Ling hadn't expected that he would only release 5%. The creatures of the ancient universe in front of him were all intimidated by him. After a few seconds of silence, the insects that had emerged from the ground retreated under this enormous pressure. They burrowed back into the ground, moving in unison and extremely obedient, flying in the sky. These hunters of the end, who were known as the rulers of the past, crashed into the ground one after another. Then, Wang Ling jumped off the ancient mountain and began to examine these hunters of the end, who had fainted under the enormous mental pressure. Wang Ling crouched down and poked one of the hunters of the end with a finger. Whether it was the touch or the fishy smell on the surface, it smelled like seafood. All of this seemed no different from the grilled squid at a barbecue shop. The main reason why he had used mental pressure to intimidate everyone present was to ensure that these creatures of the ancient universe wouldn't have any meat left. After all, if he had directly used the King's Eye's ability to release rays, these guys would have all died and turned to ash on the spot, and his little sister might not even have a piece of meat to eat. At that moment, Wang Ling sighed deeply in his heart. He didn't stand on ceremony, and directly plucked out one of the Hunter of the End's tentacles, then used the most basic, palm flame spell, to roast it. It wasn't long before a fragrant aroma filled the air. Without any seasoning, little girl Nguyen directly bit down on the tentacle with a howl. But after chewing for a while, Wang Nguyen spat out the meat in her mouth. Because the meat of a Hunter of the End didn't taste good. At that moment, she turned her gaze to the evolving grave god. At that moment, the grave god's resurrection ritual had already reached its final stage. The huge chunk of meat floating in the air gave off a dark yellow luster. From a distance, it looked like the yolk of a salted duck egg that was dripping with oil. Wang Nguyen swallowed hard, and suddenly felt that the grave god was even more delicious. Chapter 1587. Wang Ling realized a very serious problem. Although he and Wang Nguyen had been born in the same womb, little girl Nguyen's taste in food was completely different from his. Why did she always stare at strange things? And for some reason, he felt that after eating the Hunter of the End's tentacle, little girl Nguyen seemed to have grown a little bigger. His body seemed to be bigger than before. It looked like Wang Nguyen had spat out that piece of tentacle meat, but she had actually eaten a part of it. Little girl Nguyen had her own picky tastes when it came to meat. The part that she had spat out was older. With a great battle at hand, she was well aware that her pitiful and small body needed to replenish its energy in time. Who told her to be a weak baby girl? At the same time, to ensure that she wouldn't continue to be a weak girl when she grew up, little girl Nguyen instantly realized a new skill. That was, to eat supplements. Back when Mother Wang had been pregnant with her, she had eaten all kinds of supplements and highly nutritious delicacies. Speaking of which, little girl Nguyen was now labeled a foodie. In fact, this was partly due to Mother Wang's prenatal education. When Wang Nguyen's gaze focused on the grave god's enormous piece of flesh in front of her that was emitting the light of revival, the statue also sensed danger. Although the grave god was just a huge piece of flesh now, it actually had spiritual intelligence. This piece of flesh was in fact an outer god embryo. Outer god. This was the most powerful lineage of the great old ones of the ancient universe. In Wang Nguyen's eyes, the golden light, which looked like a salted egg yolk, was a sign of revival. It flickered repeatedly on the grave god's enormous body at the rate of a heartbeat. It looked like a holy light. Set off by this supreme world of boundless darkness, the grave god's existence was simply like a miracle. Everyone who was watching this scene was shocked by the scene in front of them. It's far beyond the level of human cultivators. This was the first time even the monk had seen an outer god revive in the ancient universe. In his thousands of reincarnations, he thought that he had seen through countless scenes since ancient times, but this was the first time he had seen an outer god revive. He's coming back to life, crispy noodles, Dao Monarch said. This was a very special kind of fluctuation, as if it was sending a signal to the entire universe that a sovereign was descending upon the world. Due to the special nature of the signal, people of lower realms often could not receive this feeling, but the transmission of the signal would indirectly affect their emotions, work status, and even the possibility of gaining weight, insomnia, and depression. Such a special signal could be clearly felt by the upper almighties in the universe. Is he showing off his strength? Tyrant was terrified. Apart from Wang Ling back then, this was the second time he had felt this flustered. Even the supreme sage of Buddhism could not help but be shaken, let alone the others. At this moment, countless people in the universe raised their heads and stared in the direction of the supreme world that had been engulfed by chaos. At that moment, the crowd's expression changed. The divine realm, divine Tao star, the domain of the gods, the demon realm, as well as those explored and unexplored civilizations in the universe, the upper almighties among all the living creatures felt it hard to breathe. They could not tell what this power was, nor did they know if it represented evil or justice. But the pain of being strangled gave everyone the feeling that the universe was about to fall into chaos. No one could have imagined that a powerful creature of the ancient universe was about to be resurrected. And it was. The most powerful creature among the rulers of the past, the outer gods. In the next moment, almost all the planetary civilizations that received this signal opened their own defensive barriers. They didn't know if this shallow barrier would really work. But at the very least, it could provide them with some psychological comfort. At that moment, the Wang siblings, Wang Ling and Wang Yuan, were in the chaotic storm of the supreme world. The giant piece of meat, which shone with a golden light, was terrifying and holy with a hint of sofa air. Endless nameless fog formed around it, as if it could connect to every corner of the universe. Wang Ling raised his hand and used the strength of his ordinary palm to create a hurricane that hit the nameless fog. After the nameless fog was blown away, it actually regenerated in its original spot in a seamless manner. There was only a little bit of time left before the grave god's official resurrection. Die. At that moment, Wang Ling heard the grave god's ancient voice full of murderous intent coming from the giant piece of golden meat, which reverberated throughout the supreme world. Like a giant mirage, the ancient god palace had appeared here in response to the grave god's summons. This ancient god palace seemed illusory yet real at the same time. Every ancient pillar and wall was engraved with cryptic runes that filled the sky and gave off an intimidating glow. Wang Ling rolled up his sleeves, intending to smash the palace with one punch. But at that moment, he saw through his king's eye that there was actually a three-petaled golden lotus with tentacles as its roots inside the ancient god palace. This instantly dispelled Wang Ling's idea of smashing the ancient god palace with one punch. Because this three-petaled golden lotus seemed to be closely connected to his king's eye, every time he released his power, a three-petaled golden lotus would bloom in his pupil. But from the outside, the golden lotus in this ancient god palace was slightly different from the one in the king's eye. Was he only able to go in and take a look? Wang Ling had been investigating the king's eye for many years, and it hadn't been easy for him to find a clue, so he wasn't going to give up so easily. Sorry, An Wan. At that moment, Wang Ling stretched out his hand to rub his sister's head. Exploring the ancient god palace would undoubtedly take time, which meant that An Wan might have to go hungry for a while longer. To be on the safe side, Wang Ling picked a few of the unconscious hunters of the end who looked the most tender and put them into his king's eye. What if there was some seasoning in the ancient god palace? Maybe these hunters of the end would taste better. Outer God Palace. At that moment, Monk Golden Lamp also saw this frightening scene through the swastika. He had seen a similar building in Dao ancestor Wang's public notes back then, so after observing it for a while, he recalled it. What is Ling Jinren doing? You mustn't go in. It's too dangerous. His expression changed dramatically in astonishment. Because it was written in Dao ancestor Wang's notes back then. Outer God Palace, that was a place of no return. Dao ancestor Wang had once sent out several real clones to explore the Outer God Palace, but in the end, none of them had returned. They had all lost contact with the palace. This was an existence even more terrifying than the highest world, It was the same as walking into someone else's laws. And the most frightening thing was that the outer god palace was in the highest world at the moment. If Wang Ling went inside, it was equivalent to being shackled twice. The monk had never dealt with the creatures of the ancient universe, but when he sensed that heart-palpitating aura for the second time since his last fight with Wang Ling, Monk Golden Lamp already felt that the situation was very bad. On the other side, the grave god didn't expect the teenager in front of him to take the initiative to walk into his outer god palace. Highest world plus outer god palace. This combination was incomparably stressful. He didn't know if Wang Ling was stupid, but he had actually walked into the cage he had set up. Not only had he come in himself, he had actually brought his sister in. But this way, the grave god felt that it had saved him a lot of trouble. Heh, what an interesting pair of little fellows. At that moment, the grave god, who was on the verge of fully evolving into an outer god, felt that he had the power to understand everything in the universe. He gazed at the brother and sister pair who had stepped into the outer god palace. The moment Wang Ling entered the main entrance, the grave god had firmly sealed and locked the palace door. Until that moment, the grave god hadn't expected this. He had just let a demolition team in. Chapter 1588. When Wang Ling stepped into the outer god palace, he was a little surprised by the powerful aura of the ancient universe inside. It was actually much stronger than he had imagined. This outer deity palace was clearly a trap. The chaotic chi inside was millions of times denser than the unspeakable land's periphery. Even the monk's realm wasn't enough to set foot here. Wang Ling wasn't used to it at first, but after standing still for a few seconds, he quickly familiarized himself with his surroundings. He had wanted to protect An Wan, but in the end, An Wan's adaptability was stronger than he had imagined. What an outrageous little guy. Wang Ling sighed in his heart. At that moment, Wang Ling was in the main hall on the outermost layer of the palace. This room was actually the size of a small world. To actually use a small world to divide the rooms in the palace, Wang Ling couldn't help but marvel at the extravagance of the outer gods. This wasn't something that belonged to the grave god, but something that the grave god had inherited after using the power of a mysterious object to activate the outer god bloodline in his body. In essence, this terrifying outer god palace should have been like those ghost ships drifting in the deep sea, drifting with the tide of time and eternally suspended in space. No one would have thought that the outer god palace would actually appear again one day. Looking ahead with the king's eye, Wang Ling found 3 entrances in this room that was as vast as a small world beneath his feet. They led to the 3 rooms at the back. The king's eye's line of sight was blocked by a golden light, so he couldn't clearly see what was behind the rooms. Wang Ling felt that this light had a lot to do with the 3-petal golden lotus he had seen outside for a moment. Although Wang Ling couldn't see what was behind these 3 rooms, he had nothing to be afraid of. It was just that the biggest problem in front of him was, he had difficulty making a choice. Faced with the 3 entrances that appeared in his line of sight, Wang Ling became a little conflicted. At that moment, Nwan gave a "ya" and pointed to one of the entrances. The third one? Wang Ling couldn't be bothered to think too much about it, and naturally trusted Nwan's choice unconditionally. When Wang Ling made up his mind, a dazzling light suddenly lit up in the small world and turned into a golden path that led directly from under Wang Ling's feet to the 3rd entrance. This was a restriction in the outer god palace. It was to prevent the people who entered from changing their minds after making a decision. Staring at the golden path under his feet, Wang Ling sighed helplessly in his heart. For some reason, he felt that this outer god palace was a little like a game. This golden path was very long and stretched for thousands of miles. After all, every room in the outer god's palace was a small world. But as the voice had said, after the concentrated mental attack just now, the dried corpses in the withered forest had miraculously disappeared like an illusion. The sneer and the eerie scene in the withered forest had all disappeared. Strength, mental strength, knowledge, speed, chi and blood, when everyone enters this outer god palace, these values are fixed. The old voice in the withered forest sighed helplessly. With a sinister smile, he explained the rules of this palace to Wang Ling. This is Lord Outer God's purpose in building this palace, and also a game for the whole universe. Unfortunately, since ancient times, very few cultivators who have broken into this place have been able to make it to the end. Wang Ling frowned slightly. Listening to these values, he felt that it really did feel like a game. And what were his 5 basic abilities of strength, mental strength, knowledge, speed, and qi and blood? Wang Ling didn't know about this yet. The old voice continued, how about it, do you want to make another bet with me? If you can pass my mental assessment, you'll know what your mental strength value is, and I'll die. If you can't, I'm sorry, but you and your sister will stay here forever. Both of you will die. Wang Ling didn't think too much about it, and just spread his hands, maintaining a completely indifferent attitude. The voice couldn't help laughing. You could have left unscathed, but I didn't expect you to choose to bet with me. Hee, we'll see. As soon as the voice fell, several golden rays of light appeared in the air, and Wang Ling saw 10 64-faced golden dice appear. They rolled and spun in the air before finally coming to a stop. The moment the values came out, the owner of the withered forest laughed. Unfortunately, your total value is 523. One value represents one nucleus. This means that you must have a mental strength of at least 523 nuclei to pass through this old withered forest. Laughter was inevitable. This was because everyone who entered the Outer God Palace would have their overall combat strength converted according to their personal ability, and then evenly distributed among the 5 basic abilities of strength, mental strength, knowledge, speed, and qi and blood. The cultivators who had entered in previous years might not even have a total of 523 nuclei, let alone this single value. Sorry, young man, this old man won't stand on ceremony with you and your sister. The owner of the withered forest laughed sinisterly. Wang Ling frowned. Just as he was about to fight, the owner of the withered forest suddenly let out a pained and shrill scream. No, this is impossible, the owner of the withered forest screamed. As far as Wang Ling could see, all the withered trees in the withered forest were instantly set ablaze by a kind of golden fire, and they started to burn. Your mental strength is actually at least 523 nuclei? The owner of the withered forest burst out in a questioning voice amidst the screams. He actually didn't know what Wang Ling's mental strength value was, but based on experience, it was basically impossible for someone to have such a high single value. After this questioning voice died down, Wang Ling's mental strength value also appeared in the sky along with a flash of golden light. It wasn't a specific number. Instead, it was a mathematical symbol. Infinity. Chapter 1589. As Wang Ling's mental strength assessment value appeared, the entire withered forest was instantly burned to ashes in a sea of golden fire, and the owner of the withered forest died a miserable death. He had confidently made this bet with Wang Ling, and hadn't expected this to be the result until his death. In fact, Wang Ling also hadn't expected the nomological system inside the Outer God Palace to actually be relatively fair. After the old man lost, he was directly punished by the nomological system without any room for negotiation. Was this the self-confidence of the outer gods in the ancient universe era? They wouldn't even let off their own people. Wang Ling couldn't help sighing helplessly in his heart. For the powerful outer gods, this was really just a game. In a game of chess, any chess piece could be abandoned. But this was someone else's territory, after all, and they had the final say in the rules of the game. Wang Ling just hoped that since these were the rules of the game, they would abide by them. He could afford to play this game. But some people might not be able to afford it. The withered forest disappeared in the golden fire, but it didn't mean that nothing was left behind. Wang Ling found a golden Rubik's Cube with 6 faces. 3 of the faces were white boards, 2 were 1 points, and 1 was 3 points. Wang Ling judged that this was probably an extra reward for clearing the withered forest. When he focused his gaze on the golden Rubik's Cube, a string of golden explanatory text appeared at the top of the cube. Golden magic block, can be used before any of the basic abilities, strength, willpower, knowledge, speed, vitality, and the number of points you throw is a multiple of the basic ability's value. If it is a whiteboard, the result is 0. The golden magic block can only be used once, and will automatically disappear after use. Wang Ling put the magic block away. He didn't know what use this reward would have for him. He was already plus infinity, so it didn't matter if it was several times more. On the contrary, this thing was a double-edged sword for Wang Ling. After all, there was a whiteboard here, and if he threw it at it, it would be very dangerous for him. He was an honest kid. He still wanted to play the game according to the rules. If he couldn't handle it, he would flip the table. Was Wang Ling that kind of person? After dealing with the dead forest incident, Wang Ling was faced with 3 more doors covered in golden light. Without hesitation, he chose the door in the middle. A brand new small world appeared in front of them. It was a vast swamp, and the purple reeds were hundreds of feet tall, obscuring everything around them. Such a scene was filled with a wild and primitive feeling, and it was terrifyingly quiet. Based on his own experience, there had to be living creatures in the depths of this swamp. Wang Ling made a seal with one hand, and several sentinels with his aura spread out in all directions. When these sentries passed by the middle region of the small world, there was a strange fluctuation that directly bit towards his sentries. Ah! A blood-curdling scream rang out. It was so fast that it was shocking. But this scream didn't come from the sentinels he had released, but from the creature lurking at the bottom of the swamp. The creature wanted to launch a sneak attack and bite the sentinel to pieces, but it didn't expect the sentinel to be so tough. This caused its mouth of steel teeth to suffer heavy damage. Then, from a distance, Wang Ling and Wang Yuan could sense the creature's furious aura. In this swamp, no one had ever dared to play tricks on him like this. Then, the swamp in this small world began to bubble, emitting a thick stench of smoke. Accompanied by the furious aura of the swamp creatures, it began to boil. In the next instant, a black ray of light emerged from the ground and launched a sneak attack on Wang Ling's back from a strange angle. Rip! Wang Ling's 6 senses were sharp, and he didn't even turn his head as he raised his sword and waved it behind him. In an instant, sparks flew in all directions as the light shot out by the swamp creature was cancelled out. This probing attack had already allowed Wang Ling to ascertain the creature's general strength. The other party's overall battle strength wasn't strong, but the strange thing was that it was extremely fast. In this swamp world, this creature had the ability to move to any location at will. It quickly moved horizontally, and then launched a new attack under the layer of foul mud. Wang Ling stood on tiptoe and floated in the air. At the same time, he activated his King's Eye, which released the eternal flame, which completely engulfed the reeds blocking his view and burned them to ashes. Without the cover of the reeds, the creature's movements could be said to be in plain view. As if realizing that it had been exposed, the mysterious creature hiding in the swamp finally revealed its true form. It was round and pitch black all over, and was 3 meters in diameter with hair and tentacles. It was actually another eyeball. With one glance, Wang Ling could tell that this eyeball was probably one of the old rulers. It was the same species as the ultimate hunter that he had dealt with outside, but it seemed a little different. At that moment, the eyeball appeared in Wang Ling's direction in a flash, and its pupils constricted slightly before widening. Then, a black ray of light shot toward Wang Ling with dense killing intent. This was an incomparably blazing pillar of fire, which gave Wang Ling the feeling that Angie had pulled a big one. Wang Ling wanted to block it with his hand, but little girl Nguyen acted first at that moment. It looked like this little girl was really hungry and couldn't let go of anything. She opened her mouth on the spot and used the power of shadow to swallow up the black flame in front of her. The eyeball was clearly shocked. It had lived for so long, but had never seen such an arrogant baby. It gnashed its teeth in exasperation. What a pity, I'm not at my peak, and only have a few scattered organs left. If I was at my peak, you 2 babies would have died without a doubt. The eyeball's voice rang out in Wang Ling and Wang Yuan's minds. After saying that, the eyeball turned slightly, and Wang Ling was stunned to find that it actually had the same mark as the one on the outside of the outer god's palace. It actually came from the outer god's eyeball? Wang Ling was lost in thought. At the same time, the eyeball felt bitter in its heart. In its heyday, it had indeed been a powerful outer god. It had to be known that among the old rulers, the outer gods were the most powerful race. And when the grave gods outside finally completed their metamorphosis, they would become outer gods. Unfortunately, in the long years of history, the eyeball had become obsessed with betting with others. As one of the few gambling dogs in the ranks of the outer gods, he had lost his left arm, left leg, and middle leg. Now, only parts of its organs and eyeball were left. But the eyeball was still obsessed with betting. The fact that this brother and sister pair in front of it had been able to come here meant that in terms of strength, the eyeball had to admit that it couldn't win. It had already tested them just now. So now, the eyeball officially invited Wang Ling for an appraisal. How about it, do you want to bet with me on speed? I want to have a speed appraisal with you. The eyeball was extremely confident in its speed. Because according to the appraisal rules of the outer god's palace, its speed was plus infinity. As long as Wang Ling dared to bet with it, he would definitely die. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.